She built an empire from nothing. Tonight, it was all falling apart. And the only person standing between her and disaster was the man she'd been lying to herself about for 3 years. The auction item was gone. The investors were furious. Her ex-boyfriend had just walked through the door like a ghost she never buried properly. And Liam Carter, single father, quiet man, her best friend, was rolling up his sleeves without being asked. Victoria Langford had survived boardrooms, hostile takeovers, and public scrutiny. She had never survived him looking at her like that. Hit-like. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. The invitation had been sitting on Liam's kitchen counter for 11 days. He kept moving it, under a stack of permission slips behind the fruit bowl, once underneath a coloring book his daughter had left open to a half-finished drawing of a horse. But every morning it found its way back to somewhere visible, cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing that felt ridiculous next to the magnetic coupons and Mia's crayon drawings stuck to the refrigerator door. The Langford Foundation. Annual Charity Gala. Black tie. Saturday, November 9th. Willowcrest Grand Hotel. And in Victoria's handwriting across the bottom, impatient and slanted the way it always was when she'd written something fast. Don't even think about saying no. Liam had thought about saying no approximately 47 times. He was not a gala person. He was a packed lunch, parent-teacher conference, Saturday morning cartoons kind of person. He wore his good jeans to nice dinners and owned exactly one suit that still fit. The charcoal one he'd bought for his cousin's wedding 4 years ago and worn twice since. He had a 7-year-old daughter named Mia who believed pasta was its own food group and that her father's primary purpose on earth was to be her pillow during movie nights. He was not meant for rooms full of people who talked about portfolios and legacy giving while waiters circulated with things on toothpicks. But Victoria had asked. And when Victoria asked for something directly, not suggested, not floated the idea, but actually asked, it meant she needed it. She wouldn't say that. She'd frame it as, you'd be doing me a favor, or I just don't want to go alone. Or in this case, the handwritten note that said nothing about needing him at all. Just don't say no. 11 years of friendship had taught him to read between those lines. He called his sister Dana on a Tuesday evening while Mia was in the bath singing something loudly and off-key that may have once been a pop song. I need you to watch Mia Saturday night, he said. The gala thing? How do you know about the gala thing? Victoria texted me 3 days ago to make sure you wouldn't have a reason to back out. A pause. Dana had the particular silence of someone trying not to sound smug and failing. She thought of everything. Liam leaned against the kitchen counter and stared at the invitation. She thought of everything, he repeated, mostly to himself. You should get the suit dry cleaned, Dana said. It's been sitting in the back of your closet since Mark's wedding. It's fine. Liam, I'll get it dry cleaned. Saturday arrived the way big evenings always did, faster than expected and heavier than anticipated. Dana showed up at 4:30 with overnight things for Mia and a takeout bag from the Thai place on Clement Street, which meant she was planning to stay the whole night and had already decided this was worth monitoring closely. Mia launched herself at her aunt with the full-body enthusiasm of a child who had no concept of personal space, and Liam watched them disappear into the living room while he stood in the kitchen in his undershirt, the dry-cleaned suit hanging on the pantry door, feeling vaguely like he was preparing for something he didn't have the right training for. Daddy, you look weird, Mia announced from the couch, where she had apparently repositioned herself specifically to evaluate him. Thank you, Bug. The good weird, like when you wore the bow tie at Uncle Mark's wedding. This one doesn't have a bow tie. Mia considered this seriously. You should get a bow tie. I'll look into it. He finished dressing in the bathroom because the mirror in the hallway was at the wrong height, and he didn't want Dana's commentary on whether he was doing the tie correctly. He was, in fact, doing it correctly. He'd watched a YouTube video. Twice. At 5:15, his phone buzzed. Are you almost here? V, I'm not picking you up until 6. L, I know. I'm just asking. He almost typed, you're nervous, but stopped himself. She didn't like being called nervous. She preferred focused or prepared, or, on the occasions when she was in a generous enough mood to admit it, a little wound up. But never nervous. Nervous implied something could go wrong. Victoria's entire professional identity was built on the premise that things didn't go wrong when she was in charge, or if they did, they went wrong quietly and got fixed before anyone noticed. I'll be there at 6. L. Fine. Use the parking garage. Street parking is a nightmare tonight. I know how parking works, Victoria. You parked on the wrong side of a one-way street last month. That was one time. Liam. He put his phone in his pocket, kissed Mia on the top of her head, told Dana not to let her stay up past 9, and walked out the door knowing full well Mia would be asleep at 8:30 because she always crashed hard on nights Dana visited, worn out from the excitement of having her favorite person in the world all to herself. The drive to Victoria's building took 22 minutes. He found the parking garage without incident. Victoria lived in a building that had a doorman named Gerald, who had learned Liam's name inside of the first 2 visits and always greeted him like he was expected, which, after 11 years, he usually was. The elevator smelled faintly of something expensive that Liam had never been able to identify. Not perfume, exactly, more like the idea of refinement distilled into a scent. He knocked on 14C. 3 knocks, the way he always did. "It's open," she called from somewhere inside. He pushed the door, and the first thing he saw was the dress. It was draped over the back of the living room couch, deep navy, long, structured at the top, in a way that suggested whoever designed it had very specific opinions about engineering. It was not yet on Victoria. Victoria was in the kitchen in what appeared to be a silk robe the color of pale champagne, standing at the island with her phone in one hand and a glass of water in the other. And she was frowning at the screen in the particular way she frowned when something had gone sideways, and she hadn't yet decided how sideways. 5 minutes, she said without looking up. "Pour yourself something if you want. The bourbon is in the cabinet above the microwave. It's 6 o'clock. You're at a black tie event in 2 hours, Liam. 1 drink is not a crisis." He poured himself 2 fingers and leaned against the counter across from her, giving her the space she needed when she was working through something. The apartment was cleaner than it usually was on a Saturday, which meant she'd either cleaned it herself, unlikely, given her week, or asked her regular cleaning service to come by specifically because she didn't want the visible evidence of how hard she'd been working lately. The stack of folders that usually lived on the dining table had been moved. Her second laptop, which normally occupied one of the kitchen chairs, was gone. Everything felt arranged rather than lived in. "Talk to me," he said. "Everything is fine." "You said 5 minutes and you haven't moved in the 30 seconds since I walked in." She finally looked up, and something shifted in her expression. Not much, just a small unlocking, the way her face changed when she stopped performing and remembered she was talking to him. "The centerpiece piece for the auction," she said, "the Harmon sculpture. It was supposed to arrive at the hotel by 4. As of 20 minutes ago, no one could confirm it was there. Couldn't confirm or confirmed it wasn't? There's a difference? Significant difference." She set her phone on the counter. "Couldn't confirm," which means either it arrived and no one checked it in properly, or there's been a delay, or... She stopped, picked up her water, put it down without drinking. "The piece is valued at $400,000. The auction is built around it. Half the donors coming tonight are coming specifically because of that piece." Liam nodded slowly. "What are you doing about it right now?" "Marcus is at the hotel. He's looking." "Okay. So Marcus is handling it." "Marcus is 26, and this is the largest event we've ever hosted. You hired him because he handles things." "I hired him because he's excellent under normal pressure. This is..." She caught herself, exhaled. "This is a lot of pressure." "It's going to be fine." She gave him a look. "You don't know that. I know that you've been planning this event for 4 months. Your team is there right now, and you haven't left yet because you'd rather spiral in your kitchen than spiral in a car. Which is fair, but at some point you have to put on the dress, Victoria." A beat. Then she laughed. Short, involuntary, the kind that escaped before she could decide whether it was appropriate. It changed her whole face, knocked 4 years off her age, and replaced the CEO with the person he'd known before the title, before the corner office, before the profile in Forbes that she'd complained about for 2 weeks because they'd gotten her college major wrong. "I'm not spiraling," she said. "You're doing your pre-spiral warm-up. That's not a thing. It's very much a thing. You go quiet, you find something small to fixate on, and then you..." "I'm going to put on my dress," she said, pointing at him in a way that was meant to be a warning and landed closer to fond. "Stay there." She disappeared into the bedroom. Liam finished his bourbon slowly and looked around the apartment. A framed photo on the bookshelf. Him, Victoria, Dana, and 2 people from her old marketing team at a New Year's party years ago, all of them mid-laugh at something no one could probably remember now. a small succulent on the windowsill that he'd bought her as a joke 2 winters ago when she'd mentioned she wanted plants but killed everything. He called it Greg. Greg was still alive. She'd kept Greg alive for 2 years, which felt like a small miracle, and also told him something about her capacity for commitment that she didn't often let other people see. "I need help with the zipper," she called from the bedroom. He walked to the doorway and stopped. The bedroom wasn't off limits exactly. He'd been in it before, once when she'd been sick with a bad flu, and he'd brought groceries and ended up rearranging her medication on the nightstand so she could actually reach it. And once, when Mia had been 4 years old and fallen asleep on Victoria's bed during a Sunday afternoon that ran long. But he didn't make a habit of standing in her bedroom doorway in a suit at 6 in the evening. She was in the dress, the navy one, facing the mirror over her dresser with one hand holding her hair up off the back of her neck and the other at her side. The zipper pulled about halfway up and then stopped where she couldn't reach. The room smelled like her perfume. Something with sandalwood and something floral underneath it that he'd never been able to name and never asked about because some things, when you name them, become different things entirely. "It's stuck," she said, watching him in the mirror. "The fabric is catching." "Hold on." He crossed the room, stood behind her, worked the zipper carefully. It had caught on a small thread near the seam, and he eased it loose without tearing anything, then drew it up slowly until it reached the clasp at the top. He should have stepped back. That was the logical next motion. Finish the task, step back, make some comment about Greg or the bourbon or the fact that they needed to leave in 40 minutes. He didn't step back. He didn't know later which one of them didn't move first. Maybe both of them. Maybe the room just held still for a second longer than it should have. The two of them in the mirror's reflection, her hand still lifted, his at the top of the zipper, and something in the space between their eyes meeting through the glass that was not new, couldn't have been new, because it settled in too easily to be new, but was, for the first time, visible. Victoria looked away first, let her hair fall. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was level, practiced. "Yeah." His wasn't quite. He stepped back. She reached for her earrings on the dresser, and he went back to the kitchen and poured the rest of his drink down the sink because he didn't actually want it anymore. They didn't talk about what had not happened. They were good at that. Years of practice. Bull. The car ride to Willowcrest was mostly logistics. Victoria spent it on the phone with Marcus, who had confirmed the sculpture had arrived but was trapped in the loading dock area due to a miscommunication about freight elevator access. She spoke with the precision she always used in crisis mode. Short sentences, direct questions, no words wasted on reassurance she didn't feel. Liam drove and listened, and occasionally handed her the water bottle he'd pulled from her bag without being asked. "Tell them not to move it until I get there," she said into the phone. "I don't want it moved without someone who knows what they're doing overseeing it. It's a 200-pound bronze. You don't just—" A pause. Her knuckles whitened slightly on the phone. "Marcus, listen to me. Do not move it yet. I'll be there in 12 minutes. She hung up. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. "Breathing helps," Liam said. "I'm breathing. Faster than usual." "Liam, I know." A shorter silence. "I know, She looked out the window at the city sliding past. "I'm fine." He didn't say anything else, just drove. Gave her the 12 minutes she needed to pull herself back together without an audience making commentary on the process. By the time he pulled into the hotel's circular drive and a valet appeared at the car door, Victoria Langford was once again exactly who she needed to be. Composed, direct, beautiful in navy blue, walking toward the entrance like the evening had always been hers. She was good at that. The reconstruction. He'd always admired it even when it scared him a little, the speed at which she could put the walls back up. What he hadn't let himself think about, for 11 years, was how clearly he could see the seams. The Willowcrest Grand Hotel was the kind of place that knew it was important and made sure you understood that within the first 30 seconds of being inside it. The lobby ceiling climbed 4 stories, chandeliers hung in formations that probably had a specific architectural name Liam didn't know, and the floors were marble polished to a reflectiveness that made you briefly concerned about your shoes. It was already crowded, and it was only 6:40. Victoria broke off almost immediately. Not unkindly. She touched his arm as she went, a quick pressure that said, "I see you, don't go far." But the moment they crossed the threshold, she had been absorbed into the machinery of the event. Her director of communications materialized at her left shoulder. Her head of development appeared from a cluster of people near the registration tables. Someone from the hotel's event staff intercepted her before she reached the elevator. Liam stood in the lobby and watched her work. It was something he'd observed before, but never quite in this context, this scale. She moved through conversations the way water moves through tight spaces, finding the fastest route, adapting shape without losing substance. She smiled at the right moments and listened with her whole face and said the exact right thing to each person without ever appearing to be performing any of it. He thought about the kitchen 45 minutes ago, the way she'd laughed, the pre-spiral warm-up. Nobody in this room would see that version of her. That was, he understood suddenly, specifically for him, and had been for a long time, maybe always. And he wasn't entirely sure what to do with that knowledge or where it had been living in him without his permission. A waiter appeared with a tray of champagne. Liam took a glass and moved toward the perimeter of the room, which was his standard operating position at any event he didn't fully belong to, near the windows where the city lights were coming on below. If you stood at the edge, you could watch without being expected to participate, which suited him. Liam, he turned. The man smiling at him was someone he recognized from a photo on Victoria's phone, in a conversation she'd closed quickly when she'd noticed he'd seen it. 35, maybe. Well-built. The kind of effortless in a tuxedo that suggested he wore one regularly. The kind of confident that had never, Liam suspected, been tested very hard. "I'm sorry," Liam said. "Have we met?" "Not officially." He extended a hand. "Connor Walsh, old friend of Victoria's." The way he said old friend carried a specific gravity that the words themselves didn't require. Liam shook his hand. "Liam Carter." "Right." Connor nodded, and something in his expression rearranged itself in a way that was almost imperceptible but wasn't. "She mentioned you." "Did she?" "The best friend." A beat too long, a smile that was almost but not quite warm. "I've heard a lot about you." Across the ballroom, Victoria had stopped mid-conversation. She had seen Connor. Liam could tell from here, the way she'd gone very still for exactly 1 second before her face rearranged itself back to neutral. That 1 second told him everything he needed to know about who Connor Walsh was and what he'd meant, and also how much Victoria had not mentioned it, which was interesting. "I'm sure," Liam said pleasantly. "It's a great event." Connor followed his gaze to Victoria. "It really is. She does everything perfectly." Another pause. "Always did." Liam looked at him. "If you'll excuse me," he said, "I'm going to go find out what's happening with the freight elevator." He set down his champagne glass and walked toward the service corridor. He was not, for the record, a violent person. He'd never punched anyone in his life and had no intention of starting. But there was something deeply satisfying about simply walking away from a man like that, and he'd learned that from watching his daughter handle dismissal on playgrounds. You don't argue with people whose primary skill is making you feel small. You just find something more useful to do with your time. The loading area was exactly the kind of chaos that lives behind pristine event venues. Exposed concrete, rolling dollies, the smell of machinery oil and cardboard, and cold air from the dock doors still standing open. 3 members of the hotel's freight staff were standing in a cluster looking at a large wooden crate with the focused helplessness of people who have been told not to touch something and are no longer sure why. Marcus was on his phone in the corner, 26 years old and visibly overwhelmed, his bow tie slightly askew. "Tell me what we've got," Liam said. Marcus startled. "Mr. Carter, you don't need to—" "I'm here anyway, tell me," Marcus exhaled. "The crate is on a pallet. The pallet is too wide for the freight elevator. We need to get the sculpture out of the crate and move it on the specialized dolly they sent with it, but the installation crew that's certified to handle the piece is on the other side of the city and isn't answering." Liam looked at the crate, then at the dolly, then at the freight elevator dimensions. "Do you have the crate specs? What's the anchoring system inside?" Marcus blinked. Let me check." He scrolled through his phone. "It's interior foam mounting with adjustable straps. No bolts. So the piece can be removed by hand if you're careful." "Theoretically, yes, but the liability is mine, if anyone asks." Liam took his jacket off and handed it to Marcus, who held it with the expression of a person who had not anticipated this turn of events. "Get me someone from the freight team who's actually moved fine art before, even once, and get me the dolly." "Mr. Carter, you're a guest. I'm also a structural engineer who spent 3 years doing museum installation work before Mia was born. He loosened his tie and rolled his sleeves up. I'm not going to drop a 200-pound bronze. Let's go. Marcus stared at him for approximately 2 seconds. Then he turned and started moving. Isham. The sculpture was a Harmon, one of the late artist's final pieces, a bronze figure of two people mid-motion, slightly abstracted, the kind of work that made you feel something before you could articulate what. Liam had seen reproductions. The actual piece was heavier than it looked and more beautiful, the patina on the bronze catching the loading dock's fluorescent light in ways it probably wasn't meant to. He and two freight workers, one named Dale, who had, in fact, moved a Calder once and had opinions about it, removed it from the crate in 12 minutes. Carefully. Methodically. Without rushing. They got it onto the dolly, navigated the freight elevator, moved it through the service corridor into the ballroom staging area, where the auction committee had set up lighting specifically for the piece. When it was positioned, finally, properly positioned, Liam stepped back and looked at it. Dale looked at it too. Nice piece, he said. Yeah, Liam said. It really is. He put his jacket back on, straightened his tie in the reflection of a mirrored pillar. He was not under any illusion that he looked polished. He was aware that he probably looked like a man who had just moved a sculpture, because he had, but the jacket helped. He walked back into the ballroom and stopped. Victoria was watching him from across the room. She was standing with 3 people who were almost certainly major donors, and she was supposed to be talking to them. And from the slight delay in her expression when she registered he was looking back, she had been watching him for a moment before she'd expected to be caught. She looked away, returned to the conversation. He found a new glass of champagne and stood in his usual spot by the windows. 12 minutes later, she appeared beside him. Marcus told me, she said quietly. The piece is set. Lighting is on it. The auction committee is happy. You were supposed to be a guest tonight. Somebody had to handle the elevator situation. Liam. She said his name differently that time. Not the way she said it when she was managing him, or redirecting him, or gently pulling him back from something. She said it the way she said it in the kitchen sometimes, when they were 3 hours into a conversation about nothing and everything, and she was tired enough to stop managing anything at all. The way that sounded, always, like arriving somewhere. Thank you. He looked at her. That's what I'm here for. She held his gaze for a moment too long. Then, you've got something on your lapel. He looked down. There was a faint smudge, probably from the crate. He brushed it off. Connor Walsh is here, he said. The shift in her was subtle, a small tightening around the eyes. I know. Do you want to talk about that? Not tonight. Okay. Not no, she said quieter. Just not tonight. He nodded, looked back out at the city. Okay. They stood together for a moment in the particular comfortable silence that had always been one of the things he valued most about her. The ability to stand next to each other without filling every space with words. Most people couldn't do that. Most people experienced silence as a problem to be solved. With Victoria, silence had always felt like a room they'd built together, something with 4 walls and enough space to breathe. The auction is starting in 20 minutes, she said finally. Then you should probably go do CEO things. She smiled. Not the professional smile, the real one. The one that was slightly crooked on the left side, and that she'd never successfully neutralized in photographs, and that he had spent 11 years refusing to think too carefully about. CEO things, she repeated. Is that the technical term? In my experience, yes. She straightened, smoothed a hand over the front of her dress, a small, self-collecting gesture. Stay close tonight? He looked at her. The ballroom behind her was filling, light bouncing off the chandeliers, the hum of 200 conversations layering into something that sounded like money and intention, and the particular anxiety of people performing their best selves. She was standing in the middle of all of it, and she was asking him to stay close. He had been staying close for 11 years. He was not sure anymore that he was doing it only as a friend. Yeah, he said. I'll stay close. She nodded once, that precise, composed nod she gave when something had been settled, and turned back toward the room. He watched her go and did not say any of the things he had not said for 11 years. But something in him had shifted, quietly, without permission, the way the bronze piece had moved from the loading dock to the ballroom. Not easily, and requiring more than he'd expected, but ending, finally, exactly where it was supposed to be. The auction opened at 8 o'clock sharp. The Harmon sculpture was the third item on the docket. When the auctioneer's light hit it, when the room turned and saw it properly for the first time, lit from two angles, the abstract bronze figures caught mid-movement on the rotating platform. There was a sound from the crowd that Liam had only heard a few times in his life in proximity to art. Not applause exactly, more like a collective exhale. The specific sound of people encountering something that costs them nothing to acknowledge is beautiful. The bidding opened at $90,000. It closed 11 minutes later at $460,000. Across the ballroom, Victoria stood very still. Her expression was controlled, the CEO face, the public face. But he could see from here the precise moment she let herself feel it. A small breath, eyes that went a fraction too bright, a press of her lips that was not a smile yet but was the thing that lived just before one. She turned her head, and somehow, in a room of 200 people, she found him immediately. She held up one hand, not a wave, just a small lift, palm out, directed at him alone. He raised his glass back. She nodded, looked away. The smile arrived on her face exactly 3 seconds later, turned toward the auctioneer. But he'd been there for it. He'd been there for it. By 9:30, the event was running like it had always been flawless. The investors were pleased. The media contingent had what they needed. The staff had recovered from the chaos of the early evening with the efficient invisibility of people who had been trained for exactly this, to absorb the crisis quietly and present the finished product without ever letting the audience see the cost. Liam found himself near the registration tables, talking to a woman named Patricia, who ran a nonprofit housing organization and had opinions, it turned out, about structural inefficiency in urban zoning that were genuinely interesting and worth 30 minutes of conversation. He'd ended up there by accident, the way he usually ended up in the best conversations at events he hadn't wanted to attend. He was aware, the whole time, of where Victoria was in the room. Not performing awareness, not choosing to track her, just knowing. The way you know where a sound is coming from, without looking toward it. Something in him had always oriented toward her, and he'd spent years categorizing it as the loyalty of long friendship, the protectiveness of someone who mattered to him, the simple comfort of proximity to a person whose presence you trusted. He was starting to run out of categories. At 9:50, he saw her near the bar, and Connor Walsh was at the bar. They were not arguing, nothing that visible. Victoria was too controlled for public disagreement, and Connor was too practiced. But whatever was passing between them was not comfortable. Liam could see that from 40 feet, and when Victoria set down her glass on the bar with a deliberateness that was less, "I'm done with this drink," and more, "I'm done with this conversation," and turned, he had already started moving. He appeared at her side before she'd taken 3 steps. "Hey," he said, easy, natural, like he'd simply been crossing the room and she happened to be in his path. "Patricia from Open Doors wants to talk to you about the zoning advocacy project. She's been waiting for a good moment." Victoria looked at him, looked back once toward the bar where Connor had not moved. "Patricia from Open Doors," she repeated. "Excellent woman. Very strong views on setback requirements." A pause. Then Victoria fell into step beside him. "Setback requirements," she said, and the word came out quietly with a specific texture that was relief wearing a different coat. "Very compelling stuff," Liam said. "I'll fill you in." They walked across the ballroom together, and he did not touch her, and she did not say thank you again, and neither of them mentioned Connor Walsh or the bar or the 11-year-long conversation they were apparently going to keep not having indefinitely. But her shoulder brushed his as they walked, and she didn't move away from it, and he didn't either. The night wasn't over, not by a long way. And for the first time in longer than he could honestly account for, Liam Carter stopped thinking of himself as someone who was here for support. He just didn't know yet what the right word for it was instead. The night had found its rhythm. After the auction closed and the applause settled back into the ambient hum of conversation and clinking glasses, the gala shifted into its second phase, the part where the event stopped being a production and became a party, where the structured programming dissolved into something looser and more dangerous, where people who had spent the first 2 hours performing relaxed enough to actually relax, which at an event like this meant loosened ties and second bottles of wine and conversations that started professionally and ended personally. Liam knew this phase well, not from galas specifically. He'd been to exactly 4 of these in his life, including tonight, but from the general architecture of any gathering where people are on their best behavior for a fixed duration and then release. He'd observed it at school fundraisers and neighborhood block parties, and the annual company dinners at his old firm, where the engineers who'd spent 6 hours talking load distribution and project timelines would end up on the back patio at midnight talking about their fathers, or their regrets, or both. People were the same everywhere once you got past the dress code. He found a spot near the back of the room where one of the cocktail tables had been abandoned by its previous occupants and settled there with a fresh glass of water. He'd switched off the alcohol an hour ago, habit from years of being the person responsible for driving home, and watched the room reorganize itself. Victoria was across the ballroom, standing with a group of 4 people whose collective net worth he didn't want to try to calculate. She was laughing at something, the real laugh, the one that got away from her sometimes, and he could tell from here because her head tilted slightly to the left when it was genuine and stayed level when it was performed. Left tilt, real. She was doing fine. She had always been going to do fine. He'd known that from the moment she'd walked into the lobby and the event machinery had absorbed her, and she'd led it, competently and without flinching. Victoria was built for rooms like this, even when the rooms like this were quietly falling apart. What he hadn't expected was to spend the evening this aware of her specifically. He'd been her +1 before. Not to anything this formal, but to industry dinners and foundation events, and twice to things that were technically parties but felt like networking wrapped in canapes. Each time he'd done what he always did, stayed nearby, handled whatever needed handling, was the person she looked for when she needed a moment of not being on. He'd never thought of it as anything other than what it was, friendship. The particular loyalty of 2 people who had chosen each other across 11 years and multiple iterations of each other's lives. Standing here now, tracking which direction her head tilted when she laughed, he was starting to wonder what he'd been telling himself all that time. The thought made him uncomfortable in the specific way that true things sometimes did, so he picked up his water and went to go find something useful to do. He didn't have to look far. Near the registration tables, which had been converted during the event's second phase into a satellite bar, one of the junior staff members, a young woman named Priya, whose badge he'd noticed earlier, was dealing with a situation that had the body language of escalation. A man in his 60s with the particular confidence of someone who expected his displeasure to be resolved immediately was gesturing towards something on the table, and Priya was nodding and holding her composure with the visible effort of someone using all of their composure. Liam walked over. Not fast. Just steady. "Is there something I can help with?" he said. The man turned, looked at Liam's lapel, no staff badge, but the suit helped, and made the calculation that happens quickly at events like this, where everyone assumes everyone else is more important than they are until proven otherwise. "The seating assignment," he said. "I'm at table 11. I was specifically told I'd be at table 4. "Who confirmed table 4? Liam asked. "My assistant coordinated it with the foundation 3 weeks ago." "Okay." Liam looked at Priya, whose expression was a masterwork of maintained professionalism over genuine stress. "Can you pull up the original coordination records for table 4? "I already checked," Priya said quietly. "The records show table 11. "What about email confirmation?" I'd have to check the event inbox." "Do that," Liam said, not unkindly. Then to the man, "We're going to find exactly what happened with the confirmation. Give us 5 minutes." The man looked at him for a moment. Then, somehow, and Liam had never quite understood how this worked, but it did, reliably, he settled slightly. The edge came down a notch. "Fine," he said. 5 minutes. Liam stepped back with Priya, who immediately pulled out her phone and started scrolling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "This is the 3rd table issue tonight, and I've been—" "You're handling it," he said. "Keep going." She found the email chain 2 minutes later. The confirmation had gone to the wrong contact at the foundation, a former employee whose email still received forwarded messages for approximately 30 days after departure before the system cut it off. The man had never received confirmation. The foundation's records showed table 11 because that's where they'd put him when no response came in. It was no one's fault in particular, which was the worst kind of problem because it had no clean solution. Just 2 versions of events that were both technically accurate and practically incompatible. Liam listened to Priya explain it to the man, and then he did something he'd learned from watching Mia's school handle conflicts between parents. He let the explanation finish completely before anyone spoke. So the short version, the man said, is that the system failed. Yes, sir, Priya said. I'm very sorry. A pause. The man looked at the ballroom. Table 4 was visible from here, window adjacent, near the front. Table 11 was slightly back and to the left, which wasn't bad but was clearly not the same. Is anyone sitting in the empty seat at table 4? Liam asked Priya. She checked. 2 no-shows, seats 7 and 8. Liam looked at the man. We can't move the entire table assignment at this stage of the evening, but we can seat you at table 4 for the remainder of the night and make sure your guest is moved as well. If you can tell me who you brought. The man looked at him. My daughter, he said, and something in his voice dropped the authority register for exactly 1 syllable. Just daughter, simple and unguarded. She just got back from 2 years in Southeast Asia, first big event we've been to since she's been home. Then let's get you both at table 4, Liam said. What's her name? The man's name, it turned out, was Gerald Whitmore, and his daughter was Claire, who was 28 and had spent the last 2 years doing infrastructure work with an NGO in Vietnam and was currently standing near the dessert display looking like someone who was still slightly adjusting to air conditioning. When Liam found her and explained the situation, she laughed, a real, slightly exhausted laugh, and said, Dad would have triple confirmed the seating and it still wouldn't work out. And Liam said, sounds about right. And she said, are you with the foundation? And he said, no, I'm just here, which seemed to confuse her for a moment before she decided to go with it. He got them both to table 4. Gerald Whitmore shook his hand with both hands, which was something older men did when they meant it. Claire Whitmore said, you're very calm for someone who doesn't work here. And Liam said, I have a 7-year-old, this is a slow night. And she laughed again. He went back to his spot by the windows. 40 seconds later, his phone buzzed. I watched that whole thing. V, he looked up. She was visible from across the room, phone at her side now, watching him. Seating mix-up. Handled. L. You didn't have to do that. I know. A pause. 3 small dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, which meant she was rewriting something. You're very annoying, you know that? V, he typed back. You say that like it's a complaint. The dots appeared one more time, then, it's not. He put his phone away and looked back at the room. Connor Walsh found him 20 minutes later. Liam had been expecting it, on some low frequency, in the way you expect weather when the air pressure changes. Walsh was the kind of man who didn't leave conversations unfinished, and their first conversation, brief as it was, had the texture of something that had been started on purpose. Buy you a drink? Walsh said. He was already holding one, a scotch, neat, the kind of casual that required actual confidence or very good performance of it. I'm all right, Liam said. Walsh leaned against the wall beside him. They stood there for a moment, the two of them, looking out at the same ballroom from adjacent positions, and Liam thought about how much he didn't want to be having this conversation and how little that was going to matter. You've known her a long time, Walsh said. Statement, not question. 11 years. She talks about you differently than she talks about other people. Liam looked at him. Walsh was looking at the room. There was something in his profile that was harder to read than his front-facing expression, less performed. A little older. The scotch glass was resting against his lower lip, and he wasn't drinking it, just holding it there. How did she talk about me? Liam asked, because he was apparently willing to have this conversation after all. Walsh tilted his head slightly. Like you were the one part of her life she didn't have to manage. He finally took a drink, which coming from Victoria is the biggest thing she could say about anyone. Liam didn't respond to that. We were together 8 months, Walsh said. Not volunteer information exactly. More like something he'd decided to put on the table because he was the kind of person who preferred cards face up. Ended 6 weeks ago. Her choice. A pause. Correct choice for the record. I'm not here to He stopped, looked at his glass. I'm a donor. I'd already committed. I wasn't going to pull funding because we didn't work out. That's decent of you, Liam said. I'm occasionally decent. Walsh looked at him directly now. She ended it because she said she needed to be honest with herself about something. She didn't say what. I didn't ask because he shrugged, and it was a real shrug, not a performance. Because when someone says that, you either know what they mean or you don't, and asking doesn't help either way. The ballroom noise held them in for a moment. "Why are you telling me this?" Liam said. Walsh looked at him steadily. "Because I'm standing here, and I'm looking at the way she keeps finding you in a room full of 200 people, and I'm thinking that I spent 8 months being confused about why I could never quite get her full attention." He raised the glass. "Now I'm less confused." He walked away before Liam had to decide what to say to that. Liam stood at the window for a long moment. The city outside had gone fully dark now, all lights, the bay a black mirror in the distance. He thought about the bedroom doorway, the zipper, the 11-year-long habit of standing close enough and never reaching the obvious conclusion. He thought about Mia, who would be asleep by now, curled on the left side of the bed the way she always slept, one arm around the stuffed elephant named Biscuit. He thought about the word honest, the specific weight of it in Walsh's sentence. She needed to be honest with herself about something. He finished his water, set the glass down on the cocktail table. Across the room, Victoria was wrapping up a conversation with two men who had the look of people who had just committed to writing a check. He could tell because they were shaking her hand with both hands. The Gerald Whitmore gesture, the one that meant, "We're done, and I'm glad we did this." And she was receiving it with the practiced warmth of someone who had done this dozens of times and had trained herself not to let the repetition flatten the sincerity. But then she looked up, and she found him again. Left tilt smile, just for a second, and then it was gone, and she was back to the conversation. He was in trouble. He had probably been in trouble for longer than he was willing to work out the math on right now. But tonight the trouble had acquired a specific shape, and shapes were harder to ignore than feelings. He needed air, or something to do with his hands. He picked the second option because air would require explaining where he was going. The trouble, as it happened, presented itself with timing that Liam would later think was almost comedic if it hadn't been so genuinely stressful. At 10:15, Marcus appeared at his elbow with the expression of a man who had used up most of his composure on the freight elevator crisis and was operating now on nerve and caffeine. "The media liaison," Marcus said. "Janet Torres. She's asking for someone from the executive team to do a brief statement for the morning papers, and the event photographer wants 15 minutes with Victoria and the board members, but the board members are scattered, and 2 of them haven't arrived yet, and..." He stopped, drew breath. "Ms. Langford is in the middle of a conversation with the Whitfield Group." "Who's the Whitfield Group?" "About 14% of our annual operating budget," Marcus said. "Right." Liam thought for a moment. "Okay, Janet Torres. Where is she hiding?" "Near the press area, back left of the ballroom, by the exhibition panels." "I'll go talk to her. I'm not executive team, but I can explain the timeline and buy Victoria 5 minutes. Get the board members rounded up. Text them all simultaneously. Don't call. People ignore calls at events. Tell them the photo is in 15. Meanwhile, find out which 2 board members haven't arrived and have someone waiting at the hotel entrance." Marcus was already texting. "You're sure about Torres? She's..." He paused. "She's not very patient. Neither am I, but I'm polite about it." Janet Torres was exactly as described. A woman in her late 40s with a press lanyard and the efficient impatience of someone whose entire profession ran on deadlines. She wanted Victoria for a statement. She wanted the statement now, and she had approximately the warmth of a filing cabinet. Liam introduced himself as a member of Victoria's personal team. Not technically a lie, he decided, if you interpreted team loosely enough, and explained that Ms. Langford was finishing a conversation with a major donor that couldn't be interrupted without creating a worse story than whatever Torres was chasing, and that she would be available in precisely 8 minutes. Torres looked at him. "Who are you again?" "Liam Carter. I'm with Ms. Langford." "In what capacity?" He held her gaze. "The capacity that gets things done." She looked at him for 2 full seconds with the expression of someone recalibrating. Then, 8 minutes. 8 minutes, he confirmed. He texted Victoria, press liaison, Janet Torres. 8 minutes. "I'll get you out of the Whitfield conversation at 10:23. 3 dots immediately. Then, how? He typed back, trust me. A pause. Then, fine. At 10:23, he crossed the room to where Victoria was still with the Whitfield group. 2 men, 1 woman, all of them in the conversational mode that indicated they were comfortable and not ready to stop, and appeared at Victoria's side with the apologetic but firm expression he'd perfected from years of extracting Mia from birthday parties at the 45-minute mark. "Ms. Langford," he said, "I'm so sorry to interrupt. The photographer is ready for the board photo, and they need you in the next 3 minutes, or they'll lose the lighting window." It was not true. The photographer had said nothing about a lighting window, but it sounded true, which was what mattered. Victoria turned to the group with the perfect blend of regret and professionalism. Forgive me. Duty calls. I'll have my team follow up about the Q1 partnership conversation. It's been a genuine pleasure. She stepped away with him. They walked toward the press area. She said, out of the side of her mouth, without moving her lips appreciably, "Lighting window." It bought us the clean exit. There's no lighting window. There is now. A small pause. You're getting better at this. I had a good teacher. He glanced at her. Torres is straight ahead. She wants a brief statement. 2 minutes, maybe 3. Just hit the major notes. Auction record, foundation mission, gratitude to the donors. Don't let her redirect to the new development project. It's not ready to be public. Victoria stopped walking, turned to look at him with an expression he couldn't immediately catalog. What? He said. Nothing. She turned forward again. Come stand behind me while I do the statement. Why? Because you're better than a teleprompter, she said simply, and kept walking. He followed. Stood where she indicated, slightly behind her right shoulder, out of the frame, while she delivered 3 minutes of statement to Janet Torres that was, objectively, excellent. Clean, warm, specific where it needed to be specific, generous where it needed to be generous. Torres got what she needed. The photographer got the board photo. The missing board members had indeed arrived by then, Marcus having apparently deployed some combination of pleading and authority to produce them. Liam stayed in the background. He was good at background. He'd spent years there. But when Victoria finished with Torres and turned, she turned directly to him, not scanning the room for staff or the next obligation. Just him. Good, she said. Perfect, he said. And then, because it was true, you were always going to be fine tonight. Something moved through her expression. You really believed that? I did. Even with the freight elevator and the seating disaster, and she stopped, glanced toward the bar once, and he knew she meant Connor without her having to say it. All of it. Especially with all of it, he said. She looked at him for a moment in the way she sometimes did when she was deciding whether to say the thing she was actually thinking or the managed version of it. He'd watched her make that choice hundreds of times. Usually she chose managed. It was safer. It cost less. Tonight she said, I don't know what I'd do at these things without you. It was simple, probably not even intended to land the way it did. But it arrived in his chest with a weight that was disproportionate to the words, because he knew, had always known, in the part of him that tracked things he didn't examine, that she didn't say things like that to people easily. Victoria Langford was deeply capable of gratitude and chronically reluctant to express dependence, and the two things lived in constant negotiation in her, and what she'd just said was the second one dressed as the first. I'd hate to see you manage the freight elevator in those shoes, he said. She laughed, left tilt. Come on, he said. You've got a room full of people who came here tonight because of what you built. Go be in it. She straightened, that small self-collecting motion, and nodded. Then she did something she hadn't done before tonight. She touched his arm, just briefly, the way she had at the entrance. But this time she didn't immediately move, just rested her hand there for 2 seconds. 3. Okay, she said quietly. Then she went back to the room, and he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, and looked up at the chandelier for a moment, because sometimes a man needed to look at something structurally uncomplicated. The next hour proceeded with the particular combination of mundane and meaningful that characterized the back half of successful events. The catering staff cycled through dessert service. A small jazz quartet set up near the dance area and played things that encouraged people to either dance badly or pretend they weren't considering it. 2 couples actually danced, one of them elderly, the other clearly on a first or second date and very aware of each other. And the rest of the room found reasons to watch them without appearing to. Liam danced exactly 0 times. He was a passable dancer in the privacy of his kitchen when Mia demanded it, but that was a very different context. He found himself, sometime around 11, at a table with Marcus, who had finally achieved the slightly boneless posture of someone whose adrenaline had fully metabolized and left nothing but tiredness behind. Is it always like this? Liam asked. Like what? The pre-event chaos followed by everything somehow working out. Marcus stared at the tablecloth. This was actually worse than usual. He looked up. The sculpture thing. I've never had something go that sideways that close to showtime. You handled it. You handled it. You had the specs on your phone and you found Dale, Liam said. I just did the physical part. That's not nothing. Marcus looked at him with the expression of someone who was too tired to be gracious but was trying anyway. She talks about you a lot, you know, Miss Langford. Liam looked at his water glass. In what context? Just when things are hard. Or when someone on the team does something well and she's drawing an example, she'll sometimes say something like, the way Liam approaches problems. Marcus shrugged. I've heard it enough times that I felt like I knew who you were before I met you. Liam didn't say anything. The way Liam approaches problems, Marcus said again, like he was testing the phrase's weight. I figured it out tonight, I think. You just look at what's in front of you without the drama. I have a kid. Drama is expensive. Marcus laughed. First real laugh Liam had seen from him all night. That tracks. Across the room, Victoria was doing a final round of goodbyes, the structured kind where you work the room systematically and make each departure feel personally significant. She was good at it. She'd probably been doing it for 20 minutes already. Liam checked his phone. 11:12. Dana would be asleep by now, or close. Mia definitely asleep, one arm around Biscuit, the nightlight in the shape of a star doing its job in the corner. He thought about tomorrow morning, when Mia would wake up early because she always did, and climb into bed with him before the sun was fully up and demand to know every detail of the fancy party with the intensity of a congressional investigator. He'd tell her about the sculpture and the freight elevator, and she'd want to know if there were any princesses, and he'd say, not exactly, and she'd say, but was there someone in a fancy dress? And he'd say yes, and she'd say, was she pretty with the directness that 7-year-olds had before they learned that some questions had complicated answers? He'd have to figure out what to say to that. Somewhere behind him, near the bar, he heard Connor Walsh's voice. Not words, just the register of it, low and easy, talking to someone else entirely. Liam didn't turn around. He thought about what Walsh had said. She needed to be honest with herself about something. He thought about the bedroom doorway, the mirror, the way the room had held still. He thought about 11 years of standing close enough and never. You look like you're doing math, said a voice. Victoria had materialized beside him. The room had thinned significantly. Maybe 60 people left, the ones who stayed until the end, either because they had nothing to go home to or because this was genuinely their favorite kind of place to be. The jazz quartet was playing something slower now. The lights had come down slightly. Just thinking, he said. About what? He looked at her. She'd been on her feet for 6 hours in heels, and she still looked like the beginning of the evening, which was either exceptional genetics or exceptional will, and with Victoria, he'd always suspected it was both in equal measure. About Mia, he said, which was partially true. She's going to want a full report. Victoria smiled. Tell her the princess saved the day. The princess did save the day, with significant help from the structural engineer who used to do museum installation work. She tilted her head slightly. You never told me about that. It was before you, before we. He paused. Before everything, 3 years out of school. I worked for a company that did installation and transport for museum collections. Moving, mounting, all of it. And you just have that information in your head. You keep what you learn. She was quiet for a moment, looking at him in the soft, thinned-down light of an evening that had mostly run its course. Connor talked to you, she said. Not a question. Briefly, what did he say? Liam considered. That you ended things 6 weeks ago because you needed to be honest with yourself. That it was the correct decision. That he's here because he's a donor, not because. He stopped. He was decent about it, actually. Victoria absorbed that. Her expression didn't change dramatically, but something in it settled, like a door swinging closed quietly. He's not a bad person, she said. She stopped. Started again. I kept waiting to feel something I didn't feel, and I kept thinking it would come, because logically it should have, because he's good on paper, and he was kind to me, and there was no reason. She stopped again, looked at the floor, then back up. There was no reason I could point to. Liam said nothing. He knew this territory. He'd been in it for longer than she knew. I got tired of pretending, she said, quietly. To the room, or to herself, or to him. Hard to tell. That's why I ended it. Not because of what it was, because of what I was doing to hold it together. The jazz quartet finished a number. There was a light scattering of applause from the room's remaining occupants. The bassist said something to the pianist. They started something new. "You should have told me," he said. She looked at him. "I know. I could have—" He stopped. Wasn't sure what he'd been going to say. Then there was the obvious ending, but she knew that, had always known it, and the fact that she hadn't told him wasn't about access. "I know," she said again, differently this time. The music kept going. Around them, the room was dissolving slowly, couples and groups gathering coats and bags, the staff beginning the first quiet stages of breakdown at the perimeters. The crystal chandelier still blazed. The Harmon sculpture, the one that had started the night in a loading dock and ended it as the centerpiece of a $460,000 moment, stood on its rotating platform in the center of the room, lit from two angles, the bronze figures caught in their perpetual mid-movement. Two figures, close together. Neither of them stationary. Liam looked at it. He thought about 11 years of close enough, about a bedroom mirror and a zipper and a moment that had lasted 3 seconds and then been carefully placed in a box neither of them had opened for the rest of the evening. He thought about what Walsh had said. I could never quite get her full attention. He thought about what Dana had said months ago on a different Tuesday evening. Not about the gala, but about something else. One of those conversations that circled the actual subject without landing on it. You know you're allowed to want things, right? You're allowed to have something that's just yours. He'd said he had things. He'd said he had Mia and the job and the apartment and their friendship, Dana had said, with the patience of someone who had been watching him for 32 years and was very tired of watching. That's not what I mean, and you know it. He hadn't replied. He was good at that too. The non-reply that closed the conversation without technically refusing it. The Harmon sculpture turned slowly on its platform. The two figures in perpetual motion. Victoria was still beside him. She hadn't moved. For a woman who spent her entire professional life in motion, she was remarkably still right now, and it occurred to him that maybe she was doing the same thing he was, waiting for something to tell them what to do with the weight of the evening. I should start saying my final goodbyes, she said, not moving. Probably, he said, not moving. A beat. There are things I've been, she started, stopped. He waited. She looked at the sculpture, then at her hands, then at him, a direct look, the kind she usually reserved for boardrooms and difficult conversations, the kind that meant she had decided to say the true thing. But whatever it was, whatever she'd been building toward, her communications director appeared at her shoulder with the apologetic expression of someone who knew the timing was bad and didn't have a choice. Victoria, the venue director needs 5 minutes before the final guests leave. Something about the loadout agreement. Victoria looked at the director, looked back at Liam. Something crossed her face that he couldn't name but recognized. The specific frustration of a moment interrupted at exactly the wrong time. I'll be right there, she said, to the director. Then to Liam, lower, don't go anywhere. Where would I go? She almost smiled, turned and walked toward the venue director with the composed purpose she always moved with, and he watched her go. And he thought about the things she'd been starting to say, the words that had gotten as far as I've been before the evening intervened. He'd been standing in the middle of tonight's chaos, mostly at the edge of things, solving problems that weren't technically his to solve, in a suit he'd had dry cleaned for an event he hadn't wanted to attend. For a woman he'd spent 11 years telling himself he understood completely. And the truth, the one he was willing to look at directly now that the room was quiet enough for it, was that he'd been lying to himself for a while. Not dramatically, not consciously, just the ordinary, low-grade dishonesty of choosing comfort over clarity, friendship over risk, the reliable shape of what they were over the terrifying possibility of what they might be. He picked up the last of his water. The room kept winding down around him, and the chandelier light held, and the Harmon sculpture turned, and somewhere across the hotel, Victoria Langford was signing papers about loadout logistics and thinking about an unfinished sentence. He was still there when she came back. He had always been still there. She came back 12 minutes later. He knew it was 12 because he'd been watching the clock on his phone without meaning to. Not anxious exactly, more the way you watch a clock when you're waiting for something, and the waiting has its own particular texture, different from ordinary patience. The venue director conversation had apparently required more than 5 minutes, which surprised him not at all. At events like this, 5 minutes was a unit of measurement that bore no relationship to actual time. Victoria reappeared from the corridor near the service entrance, looking exactly as composed as she'd looked all evening, which Liam had learned to read as a separate data point from how she was actually doing. The composure was structural. It held up regardless of what was happening underneath it, the way a well-built wall holds up regardless of weather. You had to look at the edges. Her left shoulder was slightly higher than the right. A millimeter, maybe less. Nobody who hadn't spent 11 years paying attention would notice. "Everything okay?" he said when she reached him. Loadout agreement had a clause about the sculpture's transport window. They needed the Foundation's insurance documentation, and Marcus had it on the wrong email thread. She stopped, put a hand up briefly to the back of her neck. Another edge. Another tell. "It's sorted." "Good." 15 minutes ago it was not sorted, and the venue director was using the word liability in a tone I did not appreciate. "And now?" "And now it's sorted." She dropped her hand, looked at the room. Maybe 30 people left, clustered in the last holdout conversations of the evening. The ones that always happened at the end of events when people who might not see each other again for a year suddenly needed 10 more minutes. "Where were we?" He looked at her. "You were about to say something." She met his eyes, held them for a moment, then looked away at the sculpture, still turning on its platform, the room so thinned out now that the sound of its slow rotation was almost audible. "I was," she said. Then, with the deliberateness of someone choosing not to arrive at a thing before they're ready. "But not here. Not with the last 30 people in the room, and Marcus about to come find me with another problem." He understood that. He didn't entirely like it, but he understood it. "Okay." "After," she said. "In the car." He nodded. She straightened. The small, self-collecting motion that he had cataloged now into something he recognized as specifically hers, the physical equivalent of drawing a breath before diving, and said, "Help me do the last round." "The goodbyes?" "I'm terrible at ending conversations when I'm tired. I either go too short and seem rude or too long and end up standing with someone for 20 minutes talking about their renovation project." She looked at him with the slightly helpless expression she only ever produced when she was too tired to maintain the CEO version of herself. "You're better at exits than I am." And he was in fact better at exits than she was. This was something he'd discovered at a dinner party 3 years ago, where she'd gotten trapped by a man who wanted to discuss municipal bond ratings, and Liam had performed a flawless rescue by appearing with coats and a fabricated parking emergency. She'd been so relieved she'd laughed about it for 20 minutes in the car. "Come on," he said. They worked the room together. It was, he noticed, different from working it separately. Different in a way he couldn't precisely articulate, but could feel in the logistics of it, the way they moved. When she lingered too long, he found the natural break in the conversation and stepped into it. When someone pulled him into a side exchange, she handled the exit herself with slightly more efficiency than she'd managed earlier in the evening. Like proximity to his approach had recalibrated something. They didn't discuss strategy or signal each other. It just worked. The way things work between people who have enough shared history to operate on a frequency other people can't quite tune into. Gerald Whitmore caught them near the exit and shook Liam's hand again, and this time Claire Whitmore was beside him, and she said to Victoria, "Your event was extraordinary, and the man you brought with you has excellent problem-solving instincts." And Victoria said, "Yes, he does," in a tone that landed somewhere between professional agreement and something more personal, and Liam looked at the floor briefly. Janet Torres had already left. Marcus was somewhere in the back managing the first stages of breakdown. The jazz quartet had packed up 20 minutes ago, and the space where they'd been was now just floor and moved chairs. At 11:58, the ballroom was empty except for staff. Victoria stood in the center of the room and looked at it. Just looked. He stood a few feet away and let her have the moment, because he'd watched her do this before. This specific thing she did at the end of events she'd built, this private accounting, just her and the space before it became something else. The Harmon sculpture was still on its platform. It would be moved tomorrow, returned to the collector who donated it for the auction, transported by the installation crew who had not, in the end, been needed tonight. The two figures in bronze, mid-movement, neither one stationary. 460,000, she said quietly, to the room, to herself. We've never cleared 400 at auction. The piece was extraordinary. It almost didn't make it to the floor. But it did. She turned to look at him. In the reduced light of an event winding down, the chandeliers dimmed now to 30%. She looked different than she had at the beginning of the evening. Not tired, exactly. More like the end of something. The specific quality of a face that has held itself together for 6 hours and is now releasing the effort, letting the bones beneath show. He thought she was the most honest-looking she'd been all evening. "Let's go," she said. They said goodnight to Marcus in the corridor. Marcus looked like a man who had aged slightly in the last 6 hours, but had also, somewhere in it, become more himself. The chaos had clarified something in him, Liam thought, the way pressure clarifies things in people who are actually built for it. "You were good tonight," Liam told him while Victoria signed a final form for the venue. Marcus looked surprised. "I almost completely fell apart." "But you didn't. You kept showing up. You kept moving forward," Liam said. "That's different from not falling apart. That's doing the job anyway." He paused. "She's going to remember tonight, the good version of it, the version where the number was 460 and the room was full and the piece made it to the floor. That's what she'll remember, and you're in that version." Marcus looked at him for a moment. "You're a pretty strange guest," he said. "Yeah," Liam agreed. "I've heard that." Victoria finished with the form. They walked out together through the service corridor, through a side exit that avoided the remaining hotel lobby traffic, and into the cold November air of the parking structure. Their footsteps on concrete. The smell of exhaust and cold stone. "You talked to Marcus," she said, briefly. "What did you say?" "That he did well." She was quiet for a moment. "He did. He panicked, but he didn't stop." She pulled her coat tighter. "I used to panic and stop. First year I was running anything. Smallest thing would go sideways and I'd just freeze, stand there trying to calculate all the variables at once and end up doing nothing." "What changed?" "Practice," she said, "and running out of the option to freeze because the job didn't give me one." She glanced at him. "And you, actually, early on, you were so unconcerned about everything." "I was 23. I was unconcerned about everything." "No. It was specific. When something went wrong, you just looked at what was actually in front of you. Not the implications, not the downstream consequences. Just, okay, what's here? What do I do with it?" She stopped at the car. He unlocked it. "I copied it," she said simply. "I practiced until it was mine." He looked at her over the roof of the car. "You never told me that." "I just told you." They got in. The car was cold. He started the engine and gave the heat a moment to find itself, and neither of them spoke while it did. He drove out of the parking structure. The city at midnight had its own specific feeling. Quieter, but not quiet. The particular aliveness of a place that never fully sleeps, but does change registers. Streetlights, occasional headlights, a cluster of people outside a bar on a corner laughing about something that would be forgotten by morning. He turned onto the route toward her building. Familiar drive. He'd made it dozens of times in both directions. "Okay," she said. She was looking at the window, at the city sliding past. "I'll say it now." He said nothing, just drove. "I ended things with Connor because I was pretending," she said. "Not to him. I mean, to him too, but mostly to myself. I kept trying to make myself feel something I wasn't feeling, and I kept thinking if I tried harder or gave it more time or—" She stopped, breathed. "I've been here before. Different person, same pattern, and at some point you have to ask why." He kept his eyes on the road. "The answer I kept not looking at," she said, "is that I've been using relationships as a test, to see if someone could make me feel something that I—" She stopped again. This one was longer. "Something I already feel, and then being confused when they can't." The traffic light ahead went yellow. He slowed. Stopped. The light was red for a long time. Long enough that he was aware of both of them breathing in the enclosed space of the car and the heat coming up through the vents, and the faint sound of the city outside like something far away. "Victoria," he said, quietly. "I know," she said, just as quiet. "I'm not going to—" He stopped. "I need you to say it. The actual thing, not—" He glanced at her. "Not because I don't understand, I think I do. But because if I'm wrong about what I'm hearing, You're not wrong," she said. The light changed. He didn't move for a half second too long, and the car behind him didn't honk because this was not that kind of city block at this hour, and he pressed the gas and the car moved forward. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" She turned to look at him. Her voice had a specific quality in it. Not quite disbelief, not quite relief. More like someone who has rehearsed a conversation and gotten to the part where the other person is supposed to either close or flee, and finding that neither of those is what's happening. "Okay," he said again. Then, I've had my version of this for a long time, longer than I want to do the math on right now, at midnight, driving a car. She was still looking at him. He could feel it. "How long?" she said. "I don't know exactly." Which was partially true. He had a suspicion, if he pressed, that he could find the moment, a specific afternoon, a specific conversation, a specific and ordinary thing she'd done that had registered differently than he'd expected and which he'd immediately reclassified because the alternative was terrifying. But he wasn't going to say that in a moving car at midnight. Some things needed ground under them. "But long," she said. "But long," he confirmed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed. Short, involuntary, the one that got away from her. "We're idiots," she said. "Yes." 11 years. "Yes." We didn't waste it," he said. He glanced at her. "None of it was wasted. It was what we needed it to be. For a long time, that was the right thing." She considered this. He could see her turning it over in the way she turned over arguments she didn't want to concede, but couldn't find holes in. "Maybe," she said, "and we're not wasting it now." A beat. She looked back at the window. Her reflection was there in the dark glass, and he could see both her actual face and the ghost of it, and they looked different in the way any person looks different from two angles. "No," she said finally. "We're not." He turned onto her street, found the parking garage entrance, pulled a ticket. The familiarity of the place, the same garage, the same elevator smell, the same Gerald at the door building, felt different tonight. Not strange, just heavier. The way a familiar room feels different after a significant conversation inside it. Gerald was, in fact, not at the door this late. A younger night staff member had taken over. But Liam felt his absence as a small piece of routine disrupted, which was probably more than Gerald warranted. The elevator, the 14th floor, the walk down the hallway. She unlocked her door, pushed it open. The apartment was the same as it had been 5 hours ago. The dress he'd helped zip up was now somewhere else. She'd have to change. The kitchen island had her phone charger and an empty glass. Greg the succulent was on the windowsill doing his quiet, unkillable thing. She turned on the lamp near the couch. Low light. "Come in," she said. For a minute. He came in. He'd been coming in for years. But this felt like the first time he was doing it as whatever he actually was, without the category of just the best friend doing its reliable, exhausting work. She went to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of water without asking. Handed him one. They both stood at the kitchen island, which was where they'd stood 5 hours ago, except the dynamic of it had shifted so completely that it felt like a different room. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Okay. And I want you to answer it honestly, not carefully. Honestly." He nodded. "Were you ever going to say anything?" she said. "If tonight hadn't—" She gestured vaguely, meaning all of it. The dress, the mirror, the loading dock, the bar, the unfinished sentence in the winding down ballroom. "If none of that had happened, were you ever going to say anything?" He thought about it, really thought about it. Not the managed version of the answer, but the actual one. "No," he said. She absorbed that. "Because of me? Or because of you?" "Both," he said. "You because you had your life. You were building something. You'd been through things, and you didn't need me complicating the one relationship you'd told me was uncomplicated." He paused. "Me because I'm not built for risk the same way I used to be. After Mia, after her mother, I got careful about what I let myself want, because wanting something and losing it with a kid in the picture is different than without one." Victoria was listening with her whole face, not evaluating, just listening. "And I kept thinking," he said, "that what we had was worth more than the chance of anything else, which was probably, I don't know, maybe it was wisdom, maybe it was cowardice." "Both," she said, echoing him. and there was something in it that was not mockery, but recognition. Both, he agreed. She set her water glass down, looked at it for a moment. I'm scared of this, she said. I want you to know that. Not scared refusing, just scared. Me too. We've never... She stopped, started again. We've never been wrong about each other, not in 11 years, and if we try this and it goes wrong, I know. Everything we've built. I know, Victoria. He said her name with the weight of the evening in it, and she stopped. I know all of that. I've run through all of it, multiple times tonight, while I was standing at various walls trying not to think about it. He looked at her directly. And the thing I keep arriving at is that pretending was already costing us something, not catastrophically, slowly, the way things cost you when you're not looking. She was very still. Tonight, he said, you told me you ended a relationship because you got tired of pretending, and I understood that specifically in a way I couldn't have told you without explaining why. He paused. I'm tired too. That's the honest answer. The apartment was quiet. The lamp made a warm circle on the floor. Greg was on the windowsill. The city was outside doing what cities do at midnight. Victoria picked up her water glass, drank, set it down, and then she crossed the 3 feet of kitchen island that was between them and stood close, not touching, but close in the specific way that changes the temperature of a room, and looked at him. Okay, she said. Her voice was low and slightly uneven at the edges, which was the first time all evening he'd heard her voice be anything other than controlled. Then we stopped pretending. He looked at her, at the slightly asymmetrical left side smile that was starting, and the composure that was, for the first time in a long time, completely optional, at the woman who had spent 11 years being the person he could find in any room just by feeling which direction the gravity pulled. Yeah, he said. We stopped pretending. She closed the remaining distance. It was not, he would think about this later, carefully and imprecisely, the way you think about things that don't reduce to language cleanly. It was not a sudden thing. It was the opposite of sudden. It was the way something feels when it has been approaching for so long that when it arrives, the arrival feels less like a beginning than like a recognition. He knew the smell of her perfume. He knew the way she held tension in her left shoulder. He knew the exact pitch of the laugh that got away from her. He didn't know this, but it felt somehow entirely familiar. They stood in the kitchen under the low lamp, and the city outside ran its quiet midnight operations, and Greg the succulent did what succulents do, which is nothing visible, which is also the only reason they survive. After a while, she put her forehead against his shoulder. Not dramatically, not with any of the performance that her professional life required from her constantly. Just put it there, like a person who had been standing up straight for 6 consecutive hours and had identified, finally, somewhere to set the weight down. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. That was still true. Would probably be true for as long as either of them had it in them, the capacity to be in the same silence without one of them needing to fill it. I have to be up at 7, she said into his jacket. It's midnight. That's 7 hours. You need 8. I never get 8. You're a nightmare, he said, and she laughed, and the laugh was against his jacket, and he felt it there before he heard it. You've known that for 11 years, she said. I have. And you're still here. I'm still here. She lifted her head, looked at him. The CEO was gone. The public face was gone. The composure was a choice she was actively, consciously, not making. She looked 30 years old and tired and like someone who had just said a true thing after a very long time of not saying it. Okay, she said, for what felt like the 4th or 5th time that night, but this time it landed differently than any of the previous ones. Not like a decision, not like a concession, not like permission given to herself. More like settling, like the specific exhale of someone who has been holding something a long time and has finally, carefully, put it down. He stayed another hour. They sat on the couch the way they'd sat on 100 occasions, except that this time the careful distance between them was not there, and nobody was performing the ordinary maintenance of just friends who happened to sit close. She had her legs tucked under her. He had one arm around her without examining when that had happened. They talked about Mia, about the horse drawing on the refrigerator, about the Sunday afternoon when Mia had fallen asleep on Victoria's bed, and Victoria had spent 20 minutes trying to transfer her without waking her, which she'd done successfully, which was something Liam had told her had elevated her in his estimation significantly. I thought you were going to laugh at me, she said. I was very close, he said. You had the posture of someone trying to defuse an explosive. She's a light sleeper. She really is not. She sleeps like a boulder. Victoria looked at him. She's not. She woke up. She just pretended she didn't. He stared. How do you know that? Because she looked at me from under her eyelashes and then immediately closed them again. Very unconvincing, but very sweet. She paused. She's been doing that since she was 5, probably, pretending to be asleep so people she likes will keep talking. He thought about Mia in Victoria's bed, 4 years old, conducting small espionage operations from under her eyelashes. She's never told me that, he said. Of course she hasn't. It would ruin the intelligence value. He laughed, real, surprised, the kind that came from the chest. She leaned her head against his shoulder, differently than before, now that the geography between them had shifted, more settled, and said, She's going to think this is hilarious. She's going to be insufferably smug. She's 7. She's been smug since she could talk. She got it from her aunt. She got it from you, Victoria said. You're smug. You just do it quietly. He thought about it. That's accurate. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city was doing its late-night thing. Somewhere, a siren, then nothing. A bus somewhere below, the regular mechanical breath of a place that never entirely stops. What are we going to tell people? She said. Which people? Your sister, my people. She gestured vaguely. Professionally. We don't have to tell anyone anything right now, he said. It's midnight. We just said 3 hours ago that we're done pretending. There's no press release required. I run a company. People notice things. People have probably been noticing things for a while, he said, based on conversations I had tonight with multiple people who do not know us especially well. She looked up at him. Who? Marcus? Walsh? Claire Whitmore, who I met for approximately 10 minutes and had clearly drawn conclusions. He paused. My sister has been waiting for this for at least 3 years, maybe 5. She's going to pretend she's surprised, and she will be terrible at it. Victoria covered her face with her hand. Dana is going to be insufferable. She earned it, Liam said. She's been patient. She lowered her hand, looked at him with the particular expression of someone who is looking at a future they hadn't quite let themselves imagine and are calibrating how it feels now that it's visible. She really did think of everything, she said, getting you to come tonight. She texted you about it. She texted me that she'd make sure you didn't have an excuse, yes. A pause. I'd already tried 3 times, and you'd deflected twice and cited a work thing the 3rd time that I knew was not actually a work thing. The Hendricks project was not happening on a Saturday. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. It wasn't. So you were scared too, she said. Not accusation, observation. Scared of what specifically? Of tonight. She looked at him. Of being in the same space with me and something being different. You felt it coming. He thought about the invitation on the kitchen counter. 11 days. The fruit bowl, the coloring book, the magnetic coupons, the YouTube video about the tie. Watched twice. Yeah, he said. I felt it coming. And you came anyway. You wrote don't even think about saying no in your handwriting on cardstock that cost more than my car payment, he said. There was a limit to how long I could reasonably deflect. She smiled, left tilt. There was. He looked at the time on his phone, 1:47. I should go, he said. She didn't argue with that, which was its own kind of new. In the old architecture of their friendship, she would have found a reason to extend the evening, and he would have found a reason to comply, and they would have both told themselves it was because neither of them wanted to be done talking, which was true, but not entirely the whole truth. They stood. She walked him to the door. They did not make it a production because neither of them did productions. That had always been one of the things, the simple ordinaries of their friendship that had always felt like its own kind of gift. At the door he stopped, turned. She was standing close, the apartment light behind her, the same hall, the same door, the same geography they'd navigated 100 times, different country. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. You always call me. I know, but now it's different. She looked at him. How different? He thought about it honestly, the way she'd asked him to. I don't know yet, he said, but I'm not pretending it isn't. She nodded. That precise, settled nod.
the one she gave when something had been decided. "Good night, Liam. Good night."
He walked down the hallway. Didn't look back, not because he wasn't tempted, but because some moments are better preserved in the direction they were moving. He took the elevator with the expensive distilled refinement smell. He nodded to the night desk attendant. He walked through the cold air of the parking structure and got in his car and sat there for 30 seconds before starting it. The drive home was quiet. He drove the same streets he drove whenever he left her building, past the same landmarks, through the same traffic patterns. His hands on the wheel, the heat finding its level, the radio off. He thought about the bedroom doorway, the mirror, the 3 seconds that had contained something they'd both pretended they didn't see. He thought about the zipper, the sculpture, the loading dock, and Dale's opinions about Calder. He thought about the car 20 minutes ago, and 2 people in a red traffic light who had finally, after an exceptionally long route, arrived at the thing they'd been circling. He thought about Mia asleep with Biscuit, and Dana probably on his couch having fallen asleep watching something, and the morning that would arrive at 7 regardless of what time he got in. He pulled into his parking spot, turned off the car. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. "Greg is fine, by the way. I checked after you left. V." He stared at this for a moment, then typed back. "I wasn't worried about Greg. You always worry about Greg. Greg has survived 2 years without my assistance. Greg survives because we check on him." He sat in the cold parking spot, smiled at his phone like an idiot, which was fine. It was almost 2 in the morning and nobody was watching. "Good night, Victoria." "Good night." He got out of the car, walked up the 3 flights. The elevator in his building had been unreliable for 2 months and he'd given up on it, and unlocked his apartment door. Dana was, in fact, asleep on his couch. There was an empty mug on the coffee table and the television was on mute, showing something with subtitles. He turned it off, got a blanket from the hall closet and laid it over her because she'd be cold by morning, and the gesture was automatic, the reflex of someone who had been taking care of the people around him for so long that it didn't require thought anymore. He went down the hall, checked Mia's room. She was there, curled on the left side of the bed, one arm around Biscuit, the star nightlight doing its job in the corner. Her hair had escaped whatever Dana had braided it into and was now a general situation across the pillow, and her mouth was open slightly, and she was making the small sound she made when she was deeply, completely, immovably asleep. He stood in the doorway and looked at her for a moment. 32 years old, single father, quiet life, a suit that fit better than he'd expected when he'd put it back on in the loading dock corridor, a best friend who had been something more for longer than either of them had been willing to look at directly. He thought about what Victoria had said. She's been doing that since she was 5, probably, pretending to be asleep so people she likes will keep talking. He thought about all the ordinary afternoons in that apartment, Sunday dinners and bad movies and Tuesday phone calls that ran long. Mia on Victoria's couch. Victoria at his kitchen table with her second laptop and a coffee going cold. Greg the succulent on the windowsill. The accumulated specific weight of a life built beside someone. He closed Mia's door softly, went to his own room, sat on the edge of the bed. The night had been long and full and had ended somewhere he hadn't quite expected, which was, maybe, the definition of a good night, or the beginning of one, or the end of a very long detour. He didn't know yet. That was what honest felt like. Not the certainty of things resolved, but the clarity of things finally named. His phone was quiet. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the city was doing its very early morning thing, the particular stillness of 3 a.m. That was not silence, but the closest it got. He lay back, looked at the ceiling. Somewhere across the city, in an apartment on the 14th floor with a succulent named Greg and a lamp still on, he was fairly sure Victoria Langford was doing exactly the same thing. He slept 4 hours. This was not unusual for the nights after significant events. Not galas specifically, but significant events in the broader sense, the kind that rearranged something internal and left the machinery running too warm to power down properly. He'd had maybe 6 or 7 of those nights in his life. The night Mia was born, the night her mother told him she was leaving and meant it this time. The night his father had called at 2 in the morning about his mother's diagnosis, and Liam had sat in the hospital parking lot for 40 minutes before he could make himself go inside. The night he'd spent 3 hours in an apartment on the 14th floor having the conversation he'd been not having for 11 years apparently qualified. He was awake at 6:12, stared at the ceiling, listened to the building do its morning sounds, pipes, the upstairs neighbor's early alarm, a door somewhere on the second floor, ordinary infrastructure of a Saturday morning. At 6:44, the small footsteps he knew by sound came down the hall. His door pushed open with the specific amount of force Mia always used, which was slightly more than necessary and slightly less than aggressive. She'd told him once she knocked with her shoulder because her hands were busy, though he had never determined what they were busy with. She appeared in the doorway. Hair a complete disaster, biscuit under one arm. The faded yellow pajamas with the cartoon dogs that she refused to give up, despite having grown 2 inches since he'd bought them. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You're awake," she said, accusatory somehow. "I am." "You're supposed to be asleep so I can wake you up." "I'm sorry, I'll close my eyes." "That's not the same thing." She climbed into the bed with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for years, which she had, settling herself into the space beside him with biscuit arranged between them like a chaperone. She looked at the ceiling. He looked at the ceiling. This was also a pattern. The first few minutes of Saturday morning were often conducted horizontally and without agenda. "How was the fancy party?" she said. "Good." "Did you wear the tie?" "I did." "The right way?" The video was very helpful. She turned her head to look at him with the evaluating expression she'd inherited from no one he could identify. Were there princesses? He thought about navy blue and a ballroom and a zipper halfway up. There was someone in a very nice dress. Was she pretty? The question landed in the quiet room with more weight than a 7-year-old could possibly have intended. "Yeah," he said. "She was." Mia considered this the way she considered most significant information. Seriously, with full attention, in silence. Then, "Did you dance with her?" "No." "Why not?" "I don't really dance at parties." "You dance in the kitchen." "The kitchen is different." "You're weird," she said, with the absolute affection of someone who finds weirdness charming. "I know." She turned back to the ceiling. After a moment, "Is Victoria going to come for dinner this Sunday?" He paused. "I don't know." "Why?" "Because Aunt Dana said she thought so, and I want to make the pasta thing." "The pasta thing requires me to make the sauce." "I know. You make the sauce, I'll do the pasta shape choosing." She said this with the confidence of someone who considered shape selection a legitimate culinary contribution, which, in Mia's kitchen hierarchy, it was. She had strong opinions about rigatoni versus penne that she was prepared to defend. "I'll ask her," he said. "Can I ask her?" "Sure." "Can I text her?" "You don't have a phone." "Can I text her on your phone?" He handed her the phone. She typed with 2 fingers, concentrated, the way she always did. She handed it back. He looked at it. "Hi, it's Maya. Are you coming Sunday? I want to make pasta. Also, Daddy said you had a nice dress." "Mia." He stared at this for a moment. "You spelled everything correctly," he said. "I practiced." She sounded pleased. His phone buzzed almost immediately, which meant Victoria had been awake, which he'd suspected. "Hi, Mia. Your dad is right. The dress was nice. I'll be there Sunday if you promise rigatoni." Victoria Mia read it over his shoulder, having repositioned herself at some point to hang off his arm. "She said rigatoni," Mia reported, as if this were news. "I can see that." "She has good taste." "She does," he agreed, and felt something in his chest shift in a way that was completely disproportionate to a text about pasta shapes, which was probably the point at which he accepted that he was not going to be rational about this and should stop trying. But Dana was awake when they came out to the kitchen, coffee already made, which was the specific virtue of having a sister who woke up reliably before the world asked her to. She was at the kitchen table with her own mug and her phone, and she looked at Liam with the expression of someone who had been waiting since last night, and was now prepared to be extremely patient for exactly as long as it took. Mia launched into a comprehensive description of a dream about horses and a volcano that had apparently resolved itself through the power of a very organized horse council, and Dana listened to every word with genuine attention because she was that person, the kind who gave children their full presence, which was one of the 100 reasons Mia loved her the way she did. Liam poured coffee, sat across from his sister. When Mia eventually went to find something in her room that was essential to the continuation of the horse council narrative she was now extending into real life, Dana looked at him. "So," she said. "Don't," he said. "I haven't said anything."
You've said so in a tone that contains a complete sentence. She lifted her mug, put it down. How was the event? Good. Successful. The auction cleared 460. That's great. Yeah. Pause. And? She said. He looked at his coffee, then at his sister. Dana was 30 years old and had known him for all 30 of those years and had the particular advantage of someone who had watched him make every significant decision of his life, good and bad, from close range. There was no version of last night's events that he was going to successfully not tell her. We talked, he said. She waited. In the car, and then at her place. He paused. We said some things. What kind of things? The kind you've been suggesting we say for approximately 5 years. Dana was quiet for a moment. He watched her hold the reaction together, the specific effort of someone who wanted to say I told you so with every cell in their body and was choosing, with great discipline, not to. How did it go? She asked, carefully. I don't know yet, he said honestly. It went. It was... He stopped. It was honest. Both of us. That's good. It's terrifying. That's also good, she said. The terrifying part means it's real. He looked at her. When did you figure it out that I... 4 years ago, she said. The Sunday you came home from her place and Mia was asleep in the back and you carried her inside, and then you just stood in the kitchen for a while, not doing anything, just standing there with this... She gestured. This look. What kind of look? Like someone who had just realized something they weren't ready to deal with. She picked up her mug. I figured you'd deal with it eventually. 4 years, he said. You're thorough, she said. It's one of your qualities. He almost said something sharp and stopped himself because she wasn't wrong, and being not wrong deserved better than sharpness. He'd been thorough. He'd been careful. He'd taken the shape of best friend and worn it for 11 years because it fit, and because it was real, and because the alternative required a kind of courage he hadn't been sure he had. She's scared too, he said. In case you were going to ask. I wasn't going to ask that. Victoria. I know who she is, Liam. He looked at his coffee again. It's going to be complicated. Everything real is complicated. She runs a company. I have Mia. Our whole... He gestured at the apartment, at everything that was his life in its current form. All of this is also that. The friendship, the Sunday dinners, the... He stopped. If it goes wrong... You've been running that calculation for 4 years, Dana said. Not unkindly. And you've been so focused on what you might lose that you didn't look at what you were already losing by not doing anything. She set her mug down. You were unhappy, Liam. Not constantly, not visibly, but underneath. You were not quite present in your own life, in a specific way. He looked at her. I didn't know what it was, she said. But it was there. And last night... She paused. You look different this morning. Even sleep-deprived, which you clearly are, you look... She searched for the word. Less managed. He sat with that for a moment. From down the hall, Mia made a sound that was probably horse-related. She texted Victoria this morning, he said, before I was fully awake. Dana's face did something complicated and landed on delighted. What did she say? He showed her the phone. Dana read it and pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling briefly. She said, Daddy said you had a nice dress, Dana said. She did. She's 7. She has always had exactly the right information at exactly the wrong time. She has your instincts, Dana said. She just hasn't learned yet to ignore them. He took the phone back, looked at the message thread, Mia's texts, Victoria's response, and below that the exchange from last night, ending with good night, and before that Greg is fine, and before that the weight of the whole evening compressed into a short scroll. He put the phone face down on the table. I don't know how to do this, he said, meaning not the relationship specifically, but the navigation of it. The transition from one thing to another with Mia in the picture, and a company in the picture, and 11 years of friendship infrastructure holding up the ceiling. Nobody does, Dana said. That's not how it works. You figure it out as you go. That's not comforting. It's true, which is better. Mia reappeared in this kitchen doorway holding something that appeared to be a drawing of horses at a council meeting. Daddy, she said, can I call my drawing the Great Horse Parliament? That's an excellent name, he said. She looked pleased. Aunt Dana, do you want to be a horse in the parliament? What kind of horse? A fast one. Yes, Dana said immediately. I want to be a fast one. Mia disappeared back to her room, apparently satisfied. Liam looked at his sister. She looked at him. They were, in this moment, 32 and 30 years old respectively, but also somehow 12 and 10. Also, somehow the two kids who had grown up in a house with a leaky roof and a mother who sang badly and a father who fixed things that didn't need fixing to avoid conversations that did. It's going to be fine, Dana said. But she didn't say it the way people said it when they meant, I don't know, but I hope so. She said it the way she said things she'd thought through. Not because it'll be easy, because you two have already built the hard part, the trust and the showing up and the knowing each other. You built it as friends because you're both idiots who were scared, but you built it. He looked at his coffee, which had gone somewhat cold. The foundation is solid, Liam, she said. The rest is just the rest. Gam. Sunday arrived the way Sundays did in his apartment. Slowly, with the particular ease of a day that had no fixed requirements. He went to the farmer's market in the morning with Mia, who needed to approve the tomatoes personally and had opinions about which basil smelled right, a preference she'd developed from watching him cook enough times that she'd absorbed the criteria. He let her carry the basil. She carried it with the solemnity of a small person transporting something important. He'd texted Victoria when he got home. Sunday still good? Her response took 20 minutes, which meant she'd been in something. Yes. 5:30. I'm bringing wine and I'm not arguing about it. He hadn't been going to argue about it. Deal. Mia has opinions about the pasta shape. She told me. We agreed on rigatoni. You didn't negotiate with my 7-year-old about pasta without me. I absolutely did, and she drove a hard bargain. See you at 5:30. He made the sauce from scratch the way his mother had taught him, which took 2 hours and required the tomatoes to be crushed by hand, which Mia had decided years ago was her specific contribution, and which she performed now with focused, slightly messy commitment, standing on the step stool she still needed at the kitchen counter. She had sauce up her forearms by the end. He'd learned not to fight this. Is Victoria going to help? Mia asked. Probably not. She's not really a cooking person. She could learn. She could, he agreed, stirring. You could teach her. He looked at Mia. She was looking at the pot with the mild innocence of someone who was absolutely saying multiple things at once. She had gotten, he thought, her aunt's gift for the loaded, simple sentence. I probably could, he said. It's good to teach people things, Mia said. My teacher says. Your teacher is right. She says it's how you grow. Mia paused, looked at him sideways, the under the eyelashes look. Are you and Victoria growing? He stopped stirring, looked at his daughter. She was 7 years old and her forearms were covered in tomato, and she was asking him, with complete sincerity and complete transparency, a question that was not actually about growing. Yeah, he said. I think so. She nodded, satisfied, and turned back to the pot. Good, she said. She should come more. She comes every Sunday. More than that. He looked at the ceiling briefly, then went back to stirring. Victoria arrived at 5:28, which was 2 minutes early, which he knew was intentional. She did not arrive early to things unless she was slightly nervous, and she arrived exactly on time or fashionably late to everything else. She was in jeans and a sweater the color of dark green, and her hair was down, and she had a bottle of wine in one hand and what appeared to be a small wrapped package in the other. Mia answered the door before he could get there because Mia had developed sonar for the elevator and could tell who was in it by the timing of the sound. You're early, Mia told Victoria. 2 minutes, Victoria said. That's early. I was excited about the rigatoni. Mia considered whether this was acceptable. Okay, she decided. She looked at the package. What's that? For you. Don't shake it. Mia took it with both hands and did not shake it, which required visible effort. Victoria stepped inside. She and Liam looked at each other across the apartment in the specific way two people look at each other when they are navigating newly reconfigured geography. Not awkward, exactly, but aware in a way that hadn't been there the Sunday before. Hi, he said. Hi, she said. Wine goes on the counter. I know where the wine goes, Liam. But she said it the way she said things when something in her was warm, the slight edge that was not actually an edge.
She followed Mia to the kitchen table where Mia was already working on the wrapping with the concentrated precision of a child who has been specifically told not to shake something and is now processing an alternative approach. The package yielded a small book, Field Guide to Horses, detailed photographs, the kind of book that took the subject seriously. Mia stared at it. The Parliament needed a reference library, Victoria said, sitting down across from her. I thought this might help. Mia looked up at her, then put the book flat on the table, stood up on her chair, and hugged Victoria with the full-body investment of a child who has decided something and is committing entirely. Victoria's expression, for exactly 2 seconds, did something complicated and landed on something that Liam recognized from very few occasions in 11 years. Something open, something that had gotten past the management layer, something that was just feeling, unprocessed. She hugged Mia back, properly. Not the brief, slightly uncertain hug of someone who spent most of their time in professional contexts. Both arms. He turned back to the stove. Dinner took another 40 minutes. Victoria did not help cook, but she sat at the kitchen table and talked to Mia about the Horse Parliament's constitutional framework, which had evolved significantly since Saturday morning, and to Liam about the post-event coverage, which had come in better than expected, and about Marcus, who had apparently sent her an email at 7 a.m. Sunday, thanking her for the opportunity and asking if he could take lead on the spring planning. I said yes, she said. Good call. He earned it. She watched him at the stove. You told him he did well. He did. He mentioned it 3 separate times in the email. She picked up her wine glass. He's going to be very good. He already is. She looked at him for a moment across the kitchen. Mia was at the table, absorbed in the horse guide, one finger tracing a photograph with the focus she brought to anything she considered important. The sauce was almost done. The pasta water was boiling. The kitchen smelled the way it smelled on the Sundays he cooked, warm and specific, and his. I like this, Victoria said, quietly enough that Mia wasn't in it. The sauce? This, she indicated the room. Not a specific thing in it. The room, the situation, the particular combination of things happening at once. He understood. He'd liked it too. Had liked it for years these Sunday evenings. Had just not let himself look directly at why they mattered as much as they did. Me too, he said. She looked at her wine glass. I had my communications director ask me this morning how I wanted to handle the media follow-up, and also, she stopped. She asked if there was anything personal she should be aware of, in terms of scheduling. She looked at him. She said it carefully, diplomatically. What did you say? That I'd update her when there was anything to update. He nodded. Fair. Is it? She tilted her head. I wasn't sure if it was fair or if it was me doing the thing I do, which is managing information until I know exactly how to present it. We've been doing this for 48 hours, he said. You're allowed to not have a press strategy yet. She almost smiled. That's what my therapist would say. Your therapist sounds smart. She's excellent. She's been telling me for 2 years to stop treating my personal life like a stakeholder meeting. She paused. I didn't tell her about Saturday yet. I have an appointment Thursday. What are you going to tell her? The truth. She said it like it was a specific choice, not an obvious one. That I finally said the thing I'd been not saying, and that it went. She looked at him. How would you describe how it went? Like something that should have happened a while ago, but happened at exactly the right time anyway, he said. She was quiet for a moment. That's good, she said. I'll use that. All rights reserved. She laughed. Left tilt. Mia looked up from the horse guide. What's funny? Your father, Victoria said. Mia looked at him. He is sometimes, she agreed, and went back to the book. They ate dinner the way they usually ate Sunday dinner, which was without formality and with Mia narrating developments in the horse parliament throughout. Victoria asked questions about the parliament with the seriousness she brought to things Mia considered important, which was one of the many specific things that Liam had always noticed about her with children. She didn't perform interest. She didn't talk down. She just listened, like a person who found the mind of a 7-year-old genuinely interesting, which, as far as he could tell, she did. After dinner, Mia was allowed 20 minutes of her show before bath time. This was the Sunday protocol, fixed and reliable. She installed herself on the couch with Biscuit and the remote, and the apartment did the thing it did on Sunday evenings in the space between dinner and bedtime, where everything softened slightly, and Liam usually felt, without naming it, like he was in exactly the right place. He and Victoria did the dishes, also part of the protocol, except normally he did them while she sat on the counter and they talked, and tonight she had picked up a dish towel without being asked. "You don't have to dry," he said. "I know." She was already drying. They worked in the quiet for a minute. From the living room, the sound of Mia's show. Something animated, something with music. "I told my board chair today," Victoria said. Casual, like it was a small thing. He looked at her. "About what?" "About us." She turned a glass in the dish towel. "Not everything. Just that I was seeing someone. Someone she'd know if I said the name." He set down what he was washing. "You told your board chair before you told your communications director?" "Margaret has been on my board for 6 years, and she's one of the 7 people in my life I actually trust." She put the glass in the cabinet. "I wasn't going to let her find out through a press piece or office gossip." He processed this. "How did she take it?" "She said..." Victoria paused, and something moved through her expression that was partly amusement and partly something softer. She said, "Is it the one who was at the gala Saturday? The quiet one who fixed everything?" He stared. "She was there?" "She's on the foundation board, Liam. She was seated at table 2. A pause. "She said you moved the Harmon piece like you'd done it before, and she'd wondered about you all evening. She was watching me move a sculpture. She watches everything. It's what makes her good." Victoria turned to look at him. "She said..." Another pause. Longer. "She said that she'd known me a long time, and that she'd noticed I was different when you were in the room. More settled," she said, "like a compass finding north." He said nothing. That was Margaret's language, not Victoria's. Victoria would never voluntarily use compass finding north, but it landed the same regardless of the source. "I told her I should have said something sooner," Victoria said. She said... She stopped. Made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. She said, "The best ones always take longer. They're worth the wait." The dishwater was going cold. He drained it. "I like Margaret," he said. "She wants to meet you properly, with context." "When?" She said no rush. She also said... Victoria set down the dish towel. "She said something about Mia. She'd seen her in a photo in my office, and she asked if she was mine, and I said no, she's Liam's daughter, and Margaret said..." She stopped, looked at her hands. "She's partly yours, Victoria. She's been in your life long enough." The apartment was quiet for a moment. From the living room, the animated show made some sound effect, and Mia made a small corresponding noise of approval. He looked at Victoria, who was looking at her hands, and he thought about what Margaret wasn't wrong about. 6 years of Sunday dinners, 6 years of Mia falling asleep at her apartment and having opinions on her furniture and knowing which drawer she kept the good pens in, 6 years of birthday cards that arrived on time because Victoria put them in her calendar in January, and of Mia's school plays that Victoria had attended twice when work allowed, and once when it didn't, sitting in the 3rd row of folding chairs in a school auditorium with her phone off and her complete attention on a 6-year-old in a paper crown. "She's not wrong," he said. Victoria looked up. "Margaret," he said, "she's not wrong about that." Victoria was quiet for a moment. He watched her process something. Not argue with it, not manage it, just hold it. "That terrifies me more than any of the rest of it," she said finally. Her voice was even, but there was something underneath it that was not. "Because of the responsibility." "Because..." She stopped. "I don't want to be another person in her life who's just there for a while and then isn't." She looked at him directly. "I know her. She knows me. And if we try this and it... I know." He moved the dish rack, leaned against the counter. "I've thought about that. A lot. For longer than..." He stopped. "I wouldn't have let this get this far if I thought you were someone who was going to be there for a while and then not be. You can't know that." "I know you," he said. 11 years. I know that when you commit to something, you don't walk away from it. You're not built that way." She looked at him for a long moment. "You have a lot of faith in me." "Yeah," he said. "I do. Always have." Something moved through her face, something complicated and then quiet, the way a body of water goes after something has disturbed it. The ripple, and then the settling.
I'm going to mess this up sometimes, she said. I need you to know that. Not because I want to, but because I'm... She gestured at herself, meaning everything she was, the corporation and the composure and the Tuesday calls and the managed information. I'm better at strategy than I am at being a person, sometimes. I work too much. I get inside my head. I don't always say the right thing, and I almost never say it the right way at the right time. I know, he said, and you're still Victoria. He said her name with the particular weight he'd been giving it lately, the one that meant, I see you, all of it, and I'm not going anywhere. I know. That's the point. I know all of that, and I've been choosing to be here anyway for 11 years. This is just... He tilted his head toward the general situation. This is just doing it with honesty. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she exhaled, slowly, audibly, a breath she'd been carrying for a while. Okay, she said, for the 100th time, or what felt like it. But this one had its own specific register, not like deciding something or settling something or giving herself permission, more like the sound of someone who has been standing on uncertain ground for a very long time and has found, finally, somewhere solid to put their weight. From the living room. Daddy, Mia's voice. My show is ending. 1 minute, Bug. 1 minute means bath time. I know what it means. A pause. Then, from the couch, in the stage whisper of a child who doesn't entirely understand how acoustics work. Is Victoria staying for bath time? Victoria put her hand over her mouth. No, Liam said. Victoria has her own bath time. Does she have rubber ducks? I'm not answering that. Victoria, do you have rubber ducks? Victoria composed herself. I have one, she called back. His name is Gerald. A delighted sound from the couch. Mine is called Captain. That's a better name, Victoria said. Gerald is a terrible name for a duck. You named him Gerald, Liam said quietly. I was in a phase, she said, just as quiet. He looked at her. She looked at him. In the kitchen of his apartment, with the dishwater gone and the pasta pot on the drying rack and his daughter on the couch staging a rubber duck advocacy conversation through a wall, something in him that had been braced for a long time came down.
Not all the way. He was not the kind of person who let things all the way down quickly. 11 years had proven that, if nothing else. But the specific tension of a person waiting for a reason to retreat, the low-grade readiness for things to fall apart, the careful management of hope, some of that came down, just enough to breathe normally. Bath time, he said. Go, she said. I'll finish the glasses. He went to collect Mia, who came with only the standard amount of negotiation, and he could hear, from the bathroom as he ran the water, the sound of Victoria in the kitchen, a cabinet opening, the clink of glass, the small, ordinary sounds of someone being at home in a place. He'd heard those sounds before, on other Sunday evenings, but he'd heard them differently before. As background, as comfort, the ambient comfort of a life that included her presence regularly enough that it had become part of the texture. He was hearing them differently now, not as background, as something that belonged to the same sentence as everything else. Mia in the bathtub with Captain the Duck, the pasta pot on the drying rack, Greg on the windowsill at her place, unkillable and reliable, the horse parliament's growing constitutional demands, the building blocks of something that had been under construction for 11 years, made of Tuesdays and Sunday dinners and freight elevators and borrowed dress zippers, and which had finally this week been named. Mia splashed. He handed her the soap. She examined it. Does Victoria use nice soap? She asked. I honestly don't know. You should find out, Mia said with the breezy confidence of someone whose investigative priorities were entirely clear. I'll add it to the list, he said. She handed back the soap and began an elaborate process involving Captain the Duck that required no adult supervision, which left him with a moment of sitting on the edge of the tub and thinking about the particular shape of his life right now, at 32, on a Sunday evening in November. Not the life he'd planned. He'd stopped planning lives after Mia's mother left, had decided that plans had a structural flaw. They required the future to cooperate, which it reliably didn't. He'd built instead for today, for the solid, reliable present of packed lunches and Tuesday calls and the farmer's market tomatoes and the apartment's reliable Sunday smell of sauce. He hadn't planned Victoria. He just built toward her, slowly, over years, without looking directly at what he was building. Mia emerged from the bathtub at maximum saturation. He wrapped her in the towel and she accepted it with the grandeur of someone receiving a robe. They went through the getting ready process, the pajamas, the teeth, the negotiation over which book, the eventual compromise on 2 chapters. And when he came back out to the living room at 8:10, Victoria was on the couch with her wine glass and her phone and the Horse Parliament book open on the cushion beside her, and she looked up. "She good?" Victoria asked. "Asleep before I finished the 2nd page." "It's been a big weekend for her." "It's been a big weekend for everyone." He sat down beside her. The horse book was open to a photograph of a Frisian, which Mia had apparently bookmarked with a folded piece of paper. She marked a page. "The Frisian," Victoria said. "She told me the Parliament Speaker of the House is a Frisian. It's important to have visual references." He looked at her. "You know what a Speaker of the House is?" "I run a corporation, Liam. I know parliamentary procedure." "I meant for a 7-year-old horse parliament. The fundamentals are the same." She picked up her wine, looked at it. "I'm going to get that book for my office," she said. "The Harmon sculpture goes back tomorrow. The wall is going to feel empty." "What usually goes on that wall?" "Nothing. It's a feature wall. Very dramatic. Very statement. Horses would be a statement. A very specific statement." She smiled. Margaret would ask questions. They sat for a while in the quiet of the apartment after Mia. It was a particular kind of quiet, not empty, but full in a settled way, the way a room feels after a lot of life has happened in it recently and is resting. "I should go soon," she said, not moving. "You don't have to." She looked at him. "I know." A pause. "But I have an early call and you have Monday morning, yeah." She set her wine glass on the coffee table, turned toward him slightly. "I keep thinking," she said, "about the mirror." He knew which one. "In my bedroom," she said. "When you were—" She stopped. "I've thought about that moment about 40 times in the last 48 hours. "Me too," he said. 3 seconds, she said. "Maybe 4. "Yeah. 11 years. She shook her head slightly. "All that time and all it took was 4 seconds in a mirror." "It wasn't just 4 seconds," he said. "It was 11 years that made 4 seconds worth something." She was quiet. He was aware of her beside him, the green sweater and the wine glass and the horse book with its Frisian bookmark, and the weight of the last 4 days as something that had settled into its proper shape now. Not finished, not resolved in the clean way fiction resolved things, but settled. Present. Solid in the way that true things were solid. She leaned against him, not dramatically, just leaned, the way she'd put her forehead on his shoulder in the kitchen 48 hours ago. The weight of a person who has found somewhere to put something. He didn't move. Letter. Outside, November was doing what November did. Cold and quiet, and indifferent to the particular arrangements of people inside warm apartments. The city beyond the windows had its lights. The building had its sounds. "I'm scared," she said again, quietly. 3rd or 4th time in as many days. He was starting to understand that for her, saying it more than once was the point, was the way she made peace with it, by naming it repeatedly until it lost its power to ambush her. "I know," he said, "but I'm not stopping." "I know that too." "Okay." The exhale again, the one he was beginning to recognize. "Okay." He stayed exactly where he was. She stayed exactly where she was. Outside the city. Inside, whatever this was, what built from ordinary materials, 11 years of Tuesdays and Sundays, and freight elevators and borrowed zippers, assembled without a plan, and standing now, solid and unfinished and entirely, unmistakably real. 3 weeks passed. Not slowly, not dramatically. They passed the way weeks passed when life had actual content in them, when each day carried enough that you arrived at Friday surprised by how far Tuesday had receded. Liam went to work. He picked up Mia. He made dinner 4 nights out of 7 and accepted delivery the other 3 without guilt, which was a small freedom he'd fought for since Mia's mother left, and which he'd finally, in the last year, stopped apologizing for internally. Victoria ran her company. She did what she always did: early calls, late emails, the specific exhaustion of someone whose mind was her primary instrument,
and who spent it freely all week and then wondered, on Sunday mornings, why she felt hollowed out. She had her Thursday appointment with her therapist. She texted Liam after it, which was new. Not the fact of texting, they'd always texted, but the texture of what she sent. She said, "I've been catastrophizing the logistics instead of being present in the thing." She's not wrong. V, how did you respond to that? L, I told her she wasn't wrong, which took approximately 4 minutes and felt like moving furniture. Progress. L, don't be smug. I'm not smug. I'm relieved. A pause. Then, me too. The adjustment, and there was an adjustment, that was the honest word for it, not a smooth transition, but an actual recalibration, happened in the small things before it happened in the large ones. The way they talked on the phone. The way they occupied space when they were in the same room. The particular awareness that had always been there, but which they'd both, for years, been quietly administering a dampener on. Without the dampener, it was different. Warmer. Also occasionally more complicated because warmth without management was not always tidy. It had edges and it had weight, and sometimes it arrived at inconvenient moments. Like when Liam was on a work call and Victoria sent a photograph of Greg looking particularly smug in his windowsill sunlight with the caption, "He knows what he did," and Liam had to mute himself for 10 seconds. Dana noticed. Of course she did. She said very little about it, which was its own form of mercy. She had earned the right to a significant amount of "I told you so," and was apparently choosing to spend it elsewhere. She showed up for Mia one Wednesday when Liam had a site visit run long and didn't make it weird, and she texted Victoria separately about something Mia had said at school that was funny, and Victoria texted back, and Dana forwarded the thread to Liam with no commentary at all, just the text. He stared at the thread for a while. His daughter and his sister and the woman who was no longer adequately described by any of the words he'd been using, all in the same conversation, casually, like it had always been that way. He thought about what Dana had said in the kitchen that Sunday morning. You built it already, the trust and the showing up. You built it as friends because you were both idiots who were scared. The idiots who were scared part was still true. He was still scared in the low-frequency way that he'd decided was probably just the appropriate response to things that mattered. You weren't scared of things you could afford to lose. The fear was the price of admission, and he was willing to pay it. The building, though, Dana was right about that. They'd built something, without blueprints, without intention, in the accumulated material of 11 ordinary years. And what he was discovering now, in the careful 3 weeks after the gala, was that the building had better bones than he'd realized. The walls didn't shake. The foundation didn't shift. It had just been waiting for them to walk in and call it what it was. The first real test came on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic test. Life's genuine tests rarely were. They came disguised as ordinary logistical problems, which was, Liam had come to believe, how you learned whether something was real. You put it in ordinary circumstances and watched what happened. Mia got sick on a Tuesday. Nothing serious. A fever of 101, the kind that required a day home from school and fluid and rest, and someone to be with her because Liam had a site meeting he couldn't move, a structural review that had been rescheduled twice and involved 3 other people's calendars. Dana was in Sacramento for work. He texted Victoria at 7:15 before he'd fully thought through what he was doing. Mia's sick. Donna is out of town. I have a meeting at 10 I can't reschedule. Do you know anyone who... Never mind. I'll figure it out. L, the response came in 40 seconds. I'll come. He stared at it. You have work. L, I have a 9 o'clock I can move and 2 calls I can take from your couch. I'll be there at 8:30. Does she want the horse book? He sat with the phone for a moment. This was one of those small things, the kind that didn't announce themselves as significant and were completely, entirely significant. Victoria Langford, who ran a company with 130 employees and whose schedule was managed by 2 assistants and who did not, as a general rule, move her 9 o'clocks for anything short of a board meeting, was rearranging her morning for a 6-7-year-old. Because he'd asked. Because he hadn't even properly asked. He'd sent an incomplete sentence and she'd filled in the rest. She would love the horse book. L, see you at 8:30. She arrived at 8:26, which was again the specific earliness of someone who was slightly nervous, except this time she had a tote bag that contained, he would later discover, the horse book, a container of chicken broth from the good place on Fillmore that he didn't even know she knew about.
a box of the specific kind of crackers Mia liked, and her laptop with enough charge to take calls all morning. Mia, who was pale and warm and wrapped in a blanket on the couch with Captain the Duck, looked at Victoria in the doorway and said, with the authority of the unwell, "You brought the horse book." "I did." "And crackers?" "The good kind." Mia held out one arm from under the blanket. Not a hug exactly, more like an instruction. Victoria sat down, and Mia arranged the blanket to include her, and that was that. Liam stood in the doorway of the living room with his work bag and watched Victoria tuck the edge of the blanket around Mia's feet with the precise practicality of someone who had decided this was what was happening and was doing it correctly. And he thought about what his life looked like from here, from this specific angle, this particular Tuesday morning. "Go," Victoria said without looking up. She was already opening the horse book to the Frisian page. "She needs water every—" "I know how sick children work, Liam. The crackers should be broken into small pieces before she eats them. I watched you do it once when she had a stomach thing in March." She looked up. "Go, we're fine." He looked at Mia, who was looking at the Frisian with the focused attention of someone operating at 60% capacity but maintaining curatorial standards. He looked at Victoria, who was looking at Mia with the expression of someone who had decided something and was not going to second-guess it. "Thank you," he said. "Don't make it a thing." He went to his meeting. He checked his phone twice, once at 11, once at 12:30, and both times found a photograph instead of a text. The 11 o'clock photo was Mia asleep on the couch with the horse book open on her chest and Captain the Duck on her head, which had apparently happened organically. The 12:30 photo was a drawing Mia had made of a horse that was labeled Victoria's horse in Mia's handwriting, and which Victoria had captioned simply, "She says I can be a Frisian. I'm taking it. He got home at 2:15. Mia was awake, fever slightly down, eating crackers with the careful economy of someone whose body was low on fuel. Victoria was at the kitchen table with her laptop and the remains of a working lunch she'd apparently assembled from his refrigerator, and she was on a call, earbuds in, the crisp professional voice that was different from her apartment voice and her Mia voice, and all the other registers she kept. He set down his bag, put the kettle on. She wrapped up the call 15 minutes later and pulled out the earbuds and looked at him. "How was it?" he asked. "Fine." She slept for 2 hours, ate some crackers, narrated a significant development in the horse parliament, slept again. She closed her laptop. "She wants rigatoni for dinner, but I told her that was your department." "Rigatoni is not sick day food." "That's what I said." She disagreed. He made tea. She accepted a mug. They sat at the kitchen table the way they'd sat at kitchen tables before, except that between them the ordinary domestic geometry of a Tuesday afternoon with a sick child felt now like something they were doing together, rather than something one of them was managing while the other helped. "You moved your 9 o'clock, he said. "I did." "For this?" She looked at him steadily. "Liam, I know what you're not doing," she said. "You're also doing it anyway, cataloging." She tilted her head. "Adding this to the evidence." He looked at his mug. "Maybe." "The answer is yes," she said simply. "I moved it for this. Because Mia is sick, and you needed someone, and I wanted to be the someone. That's the complete explanation." She paused. "I don't need credit for it. I'm not keeping score. She stopped. And for a moment, the composure dropped the way it did when she was tired or the room was safe enough. Just a half inch, just enough to see through. "I wanted to be here. Is that okay?" He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "That's okay." She picked up her tea. From the living room, Mia's voice, drowsy and slightly hoarse. "Daddy?" "Yeah, Bug." Victoria said the Speaker of the House could be a Clydesdale, but I said that's not constitutional. "She's right," Victoria called back toward the living room. "I was wrong about the Clydesdale." A satisfied sound from the couch. They looked at each other across the kitchen table. Something passed between them that was not a word and did not need to be. The weeks built on each other the way weeks do when you stop managing time and start living in it. There was no single moment that marked the transition from new and uncertain to established and real. It happened the way rivers happen, not with an announcement, but with the gradual accumulation of direction. Liam's firm had a holiday party in early December. He went, took Victoria. His colleagues were uniformly good about it. The kind of good that meant they'd suspected for a while and were relieved to be confirmed, not the kind that required explanation. His senior partner, a 61-year-old man named Robert, who communicated primarily through eyebrow movements, raised both of them when he shook Victoria's hand and then looked at Liam and performed a slow nod that contained an entire editorial on the subject. Liam accepted it. Victoria's company holiday dinner was the following week. He sat at the executive table and had a conversation with her CFO about infrastructure investment that was genuinely interesting. And he talked to Margaret, who was exactly as described. A woman in her 70s with the specific sharpness of someone who had spent decades in rooms where people underestimated her and had developed useful opinions about it. "She's different with you here," Margaret told him. They were standing near the bar while Victoria was across the room in conversation with two of her division heads. "Different how?" he asked. "She breathes differently." Margaret said it without sentimentality, just observation. "I've known Victoria for 6 years. She's always managed the room from somewhere slightly outside of it. Tonight she's just in it." She glanced at him. "That's you." "That might be circumstantial." "I've been in board meetings my whole life," Margaret said. "I know what's circumstantial and what's causal." She picked up her drink. "She told you she was scared, I imagine." "Multiple times." "She tells people she's scared when she's actually going to do something. It's how she commits." A pause. "When she's genuinely uncertain, she goes quiet." He thought about this, about the fact that Victoria had told him she was scared on 4 separate occasions over 3 weeks and had shown up to every single subsequent thing. "She's not quiet," he said. "No," Margaret agreed. "She is not." She looked at him with the evaluating warmth of someone who had decided something and was content with the decision. "You're good for her, not because you manage her. I've watched people try that. It doesn't work, because you don't need her to be anything specific." She paused. "That's rare. For someone in her position, that's very rare." He didn't know what to say to that. He thought about the loading dock, the freight elevator, standing in the ballroom while she found him in a room of 200 people by feel. "She's good for me too," he said. "For the record," Margaret smiled. "I know, she has been for years." She tilted her drink in a small gesture. "You're just doing it properly now." Oh. Christmas was complicated in the specific way that holidays were complicated for people with assembled lives. Liam had Mia Christmas morning and delivered her to her mother's by noon, which was the arrangement they'd maintained for 4 years with the civil efficiency of two people who had stopped being good at being together but were still functional at being her parents. He and Claire, Mia's mother, managed a 15-minute handoff in the parking lot of the community center where they'd agreed to meet, Mia in her coat with her overnight bag and 3 wrapped gifts she'd specifically selected for her mother's house. And the conversation between the adults was the conversation it always was. Logistics, scheduled pickup, confirmation of return time. Claire looked at him before she took Mia's hand. The way she sometimes did, not with regret exactly, more with the particular retrospection of someone doing a periodic accounting. "You look good," she said. "Thanks." "Different." She studied him for a moment. "Are you?" "Yeah," he said. She nodded once, not with warmth particularly, but with a recognition that was its own kind of honesty. "Good," she said, and she meant it. They'd been poor at marriage and adequate at divorce and were slowly, 4 years later, becoming something closer to what they should have been all along. Two people who had made Mia and who owed each other nothing except basic decency and the consistent maintenance of a child who deserved better than their failures. "Merry Christmas, Claire." "You too, Liam." He drove from the parking lot to Victoria's building. She told him she was working Christmas morning. Her mother was in Florida, her brother in Seattle, and she'd declined both invitations because the timing didn't work, and the family interactions required a level of performance she wasn't capable of on holidays. And he told her that seemed like a terrible plan, and she'd said she had 3 reports to review and a proposal to finalize, and he'd said, "I'll bring food," and she'd said, "You don't have to," and he'd said, "I know," and she'd said, "Fine, bring the good bagels, not the mediocre ones," and he'd brought the good bagels. She opened the door in pajamas. Actual pajamas, not the silk robe from the gala preparation, but plaid flannel pajamas that she would probably deny owning if anyone outside this apartment asked. Her hair was undone. She had reading glasses he'd rarely seen her wear because she only wore them at home, the wire-framed ones that made her look, he'd told her once, like a librarian, and she'd told him librarians were formidably intelligent people, and she took that as a compliment. "You brought the good bagels," she said. "I did." "And lox?" "And lox." She stepped back to let him in. Greg was on the windowsill in the winter light, unchanged and unkillable. The apartment had the specific quality of a space where someone had been working since early, laptop open on the dining table, 2 coffee cups at different stages of completion, a folder open beside the keyboard. He put the bagels on the counter. She poured him coffee without asking. They'd stopped asking about the coffee months ago. "How was the handoff?" she said. "Fine. Normal." She didn't push. He'd told her about the arrangement with Claire, not as a confession, just as the geography of his life that she was now part of navigating. And she'd absorbed it with the lack of drama that he'd come to rely on from her, the willingness to accept the actual shape of his life without requiring it to be simpler. They ate at the kitchen counter because the dining table had the working folders on it. She told him about the proposal, a new grant program she was trying to get approved before the new year, community arts infrastructure, the kind of thing the foundation did that didn't make headlines but kept things running. He asked questions and she answered them, and the bagels were good, and outside the window the city was doing Christmas morning, quiet and particular. "Mia called this morning," Victoria said. He looked up. "She did?" 7:42. "From your sister's, sorry." She picked up her coffee. She wanted to report that Santa had confirmed the Horse Parliament's constitutional amendments by leaving an official-looking scroll, which Dana apparently made at 11 o'clock last night. He stared. Dana made a parliamentary scroll, complete with a wax seal. Mia described it in significant detail. Victoria looked at him over her mug. "Your sister went to considerable effort." She did. He thought about Dana at 11 on Christmas Eve making a Horse Parliament document with a wax seal for her niece. He thought about the kind of love that expressed itself in specific absurd acts of dedication. He thought about how rarely people talked about that kind of love. Not romantic love, not even parental love, but the love between people who have chosen each other consistently across time, who show up in the midnight wax seal ways that no one sees and no one asks for, and which are quietly the backbone of everything. "She's going to show me the scroll when she gets back," Victoria said. "She made me promise to be interested in the constitutional details." "Are you?" Victoria considered this with visible seriousness. "I'm interested in anything that keeps the Parliament functioning," she said. "Institutional stability is important." He looked at her. In her flannel pajamas, with her reading glasses on the counter, and the lox bagel halfway through, and the working folders on the dining table, and Greg in the window, and the scroll conversation she'd had with a 7-year-old at 7:42 on Christmas morning, and thought about what Margaret had said. She breathes differently. He thought about 11 years, about all the versions of the two of them that had existed inside those years, 21 and 19 when they'd met, in a study room in the university library where she'd asked to borrow a charger, and had then, apparently deciding the charger question was insufficiently interesting, asked him what he was studying and why. And he told her, and she'd argued with his reasoning in a way that was rude and completely compelling. And they'd talked for 3 hours and exchanged numbers, and he'd walked home thinking he'd met someone unusual. He'd had no idea. "I've been thinking about something," he said. She looked at him over her coffee. "The gala," he said, "the thing Margaret said, about the compass." "She's dramatic," Victoria said. "She means well." She wasn't wrong, though. Victoria was quiet. "I've been thinking about why it took so long," he said, "and I think—" He stopped, organized it. "I think we were both waiting for it to be the right time, which meant we were both waiting for it to not be scary, which meant we were going to wait forever, because there was never going to be a version of this that wasn't scary." "No," she agreed quietly. "And the thing I keep arriving at is, the time wasn't wasted. I know I said that before and I meant it, but I mean it more now. Because we were building something the whole time and we just—" He stopped. "Didn't have the right name for it." She looked at her bagel, then at him. "What's the right name for it?" He thought about it honestly, the way she'd asked him to always answer, not the managed version, the actual one. "I don't know if there's one word," he said. "It's all of it. The friendship, the trust. The Sunday dinners and the text messages and the freight elevator and the fact that you know where Dana is when I need her, and you knew about the crackers in March and you came on Tuesday, not because I asked you properly, but because an incomplete sentence was enough.
He paused. It's the 11 years of incomplete sentences that were enough. She was very still. That's what we built, he said, without knowing we were building it, and I don't want to not name it anymore. She looked at him for a long moment. The reading glasses were still on the counter. The bagels were half finished. Outside, the winter sun was doing its pale Christmas thing, thin and clear. I love you, she said. She said it the way she said things when she'd decided. Not tentatively, not with hedges, with the specific deliberate weight of someone who has turned a thing over completely and arrived at the bottom of it and is now reporting what she found there. He felt it land in his chest, not like a surprise. Had known since before he'd let himself know, which was the specific irony of being thorough when thoroughness cost you time. But knowing a thing and hearing it were different. The hearing of it was its own thing. I love you too, he said. I have for a while. How long? We're doing this now? We're doing this now, she said. Steady. He thought about what Dana had told him. The Sunday he'd come home and stood in the kitchen and looked at nothing for a while. 4 years ago. He thought about the invitation that kept finding its way to visible surfaces, 11 days of avoidance that had not been about the gala. Longer than I want to say out loud on Christmas morning, he said. She looked at him. Her expression was doing multiple things at once, something complicated and something simple underneath it. I need a number, she said. Victoria. Approximately. He picked up his coffee. 4 years, he said. Approximately. She stared at him. 4 years? Give or take. 4 years. You were with someone for 8 months and ended it because you were being honest with yourself, he said. I've been sitting on 4 years without anyone noticing, which I think makes us about even. She pressed her lips together. The complicated expression resolved into the one he knew, the real one, the left tilt, the one that was slightly crooked and that she'd never been able to photograph properly, and which he'd spent 4 years pretending he wasn't cataloging. We're still idiots, she said. Yes, he agreed. But we're done. We're done, he confirmed. She picked up her bagel. He picked up his coffee. Outside, the city held its Christmas quiet, and Greg did his windowsill thing, and the working folders waited on the dining table with the patience of things that didn't know they were competing with something larger. The months that followed were not a transformation. That was the most honest thing Liam could say about them later, when he tried to find language for the period between November and the spring. It was not a transformation. His life didn't reorganize into something unrecognizable. The structural materials were all the same: the apartment, the work, the farmer's market Saturdays, the Tuesday calls, the Sunday dinners. The difference was interior. And it was not, as it turned out, dramatic. What changed was the quality of his presence in his own life. He stopped doing the low-grade management of something he'd been managing for 4 years. The careful redirection, the category maintenance, the choosing of comfortable over true. And what he'd expected to find in that space, maybe, was relief, the specific relief of a long effort concluded. What he actually found was something quieter and more durable than relief. More like room. Space in himself that had been occupied by the management and was now available for something else. He used it for ordinary things. For being slightly more present during Mia's bedtime stories. For listening to her horse parliament updates with the full 60% of attention they deserved, rather than the 40 he'd been giving them when part of his mind was elsewhere. For spending a Thursday evening on nothing in particular and not internally justifying the nothing. For sitting across from Victoria at a restaurant table on a Friday night and not being slightly elsewhere in himself, not managing his own awareness of her, not doing the 11-year work of keeping the temperature at a specific level, for just being there. In the dinner, in the conversation, in the ordinary, extraordinary fact of a Friday night with someone he loved. Victoria's changes were harder to read from the outside because she was always harder to read from the outside, but he noticed them. She texted him things that were not logistical, just thoughts she was having, observations, the specific minutiae of her interior life that she'd always been careful about sharing because sharing it made it real and real things could be lost. She'd started, without announcing it, sharing it. The new analyst on my team reminded me of you today. He solved a problem by ignoring the problem and fixing the thing around it. I had to not laugh. I got Greg a friend. Her name is Harriet. She's a pothos. She seems judgy, but I think she'll settle in. V, my therapist said I've been substantially more present in the last 3 months. I told her I'd pass that along. V, pass what along? L, the review. Substantially more present. Good work. V, he showed that one to Dana, who read it and said, she's funny, with the slightly surprised tone of someone who'd known this intellectually, but was still occasionally charmed by the evidence. She's always been funny, Liam said. She hides it, Dana said, behind the CEO thing. Not as much anymore. Dana looked at him. No, she agreed. Not as much anymore. Kim. Spring arrived the way it did in the city. Not with drama, just with light. The days lengthened incrementally until one afternoon Liam noticed that it was 5:30 and still bright outside, and the specific pleasure of that discovery, which happened every year and was never diminished by repetition, sat with him all the way home from the site visit. Mia had a school project on ecosystems. She had chosen the ocean, which surprised no one, and had decided that the horse parliament had jurisdiction over marine ecosystems, which surprised Liam slightly, but which Victoria had apparently confirmed was constitutionally permissible. She's been consulting you about the parliament, he said. Someone has to, Victoria said. She was at the dining table with her laptop, Harriet the pothos now established on the windowsill beside Greg and currently getting more sun, which had caused Greg to look, Victoria said, passive-aggressive. She called me 4 times this week about the marine provisions. She called you 4 times. 3 times from your phone and once from the school office because she decided the provisions were urgent. Victoria looked up. I told her the school office was for emergencies. What did she say? She said the marine provisions were an emergency. He sat down across from her. The apartment was hers, but he was in it with the ease of someone who had been in it enough times that his presence had its own geometry. The coffee mug he used was the one on the left, the charger for his phone was in the specific drawer, his jacket went on the hook by the door because he'd hung it there once, and that had become where it went. You become part of a place by being in it, he thought. You become part of a life by living alongside it. Nobody makes a formal decision about these things. They just accumulate, like Greg on the windowsill, like the horse parliament's marine provisions, like 11 years of Sunday dinners that had turned out to be all along the foundation of something. I want to tell you something, he said. She looked up from the laptop. I've been thinking about the next year, he said, and I keep... He stopped, started again. I keep running into a question about what this looks like. Practically. She waited. She was good at waiting when she knew he was working towards something. Mia asked me last week if Victoria was going to live with us, he said. Victoria was very still. I told her that was a big question, he said. She said she knew it was a big question, and that's why she was asking it, because she'd been thinking about it, and she thought it would be good, and that Greg and Harriet could come too. He paused. She was specifically concerned about Greg and Harriet. Victoria put her laptop on the table without closing it. What did you tell her? I told her I'd think about it. He looked at her directly. I've been thinking about it. And? And I don't want to rush this, he said carefully. I don't think we need to rush it, but I also don't want to do the opposite. Don't want to be so careful about not rushing that we spend another 4 years managing something instead of living it. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the spring evening was doing its thing. Light still in the windows, the city beginning its transition from afternoon to evening. I'm not ready for that yet, she said. The living together. I want... She stopped. Started again. I want it. I can see it. But I need a little more time with this being new before it becomes infrastructure. He nodded. That was fair. That was honest. But I want you to know that I can see it, she said, that it's in the direction I'm looking. That's enough, he said. Is it? More than. He meant it. He'd spent 4 years wanting something he wasn't saying. Having it confirmed as a direction was not nothing. It was, in fact, everything that mattered, not the date or the timeline or the logistics, but the direction. She looked at him for a moment. What did Mia say when you told her you'd think about it? He almost smiled. She said, okay, but don't take as long as grown-ups usually take because they take forever. Victoria covered her face with one hand. She also said, he continued, that she would personally move Greg and Harriet if it would help, because she didn't want them to feel unwelcome. Victoria made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite something else. She lowered her hand. Her eyes were slightly bright,
which happened when something got past the management layer, and she was not, he noticed, making any effort to manage it. "She's extraordinary," Victoria said. "She is," he agreed. "She's going to be a terrifying adult." "She's already a terrifying 7-year-old. I live in mild awe of her." Victoria smiled. "The left tilt, the real one." "So do I," she said. Tim, the thing about a story that has no clean ending is that it is, in this particular way, the most honest kind. Liam would look back on this year later. The gala, the loading dock, the mirror, the car, the Christmas bagels, the marine provisions, the spring evenings at the dining table, and he would not think of it as the year everything changed. He would think of it as the year he finally looked at what had always been there. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. Because the truth about the kind of love that builds itself quietly out of ordinary materials, Tuesday phone calls and borrowed chargers, and 11 years of being the person someone looked for in a crowded room, is that it doesn't arrive. It was already there. You just stop pretending it isn't. He wasn't a man who had been waiting for his life to begin. He'd been living it the whole time, building it with his hands, in the specific, imperfect way that real things get built, with gaps and recalibrations and things that didn't fit right the first time and had to be adjusted. He'd raised Mia in that life. He'd built a career in it. He'd built a friendship that had turned out to be more than friendship in it, and he hadn't known the whole time, or he'd known and hadn't looked, which were sometimes the same thing. Victoria was not the ending of something. She was the naming of something that had been true for a long time without a name. And Mia, who had 7-year-old wisdom on the subject, had told him on a March evening while he was helping her with the Ocean Ecosystem Project, specifically the section on symbiotic relationships, which she was illustrating with passionate detail, that symbiosis meant two things helped each other without either one having to be different from what they were. "Is that different from friendship?" he'd asked. She'd looked at him with the expression she used when she was deciding whether a question was genuine or rhetorical. "It's friendship that's useful," she said, "like Greg and Harriet. They share the window." He'd looked at the poster board, at the carefully drawn ocean with its layers, at the section on symbiosis, illustrated with two fish he couldn't identify that appeared to be helping each other find something. "You're pretty smart, you know," he'd said. "I know," Mia had said without false modesty. "Victoria says so too." He'd let that sit for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She looked up from the poster board. "Okay. Are you happy?" He said it the way he asked her important things, directly, seriously, without softening it into something easier. She deserved the real question. Mia considered it, genuinely considered it, the way she considered things that mattered, with her whole face in a moment of actual silence. "Yes," she said. "Are you?" He thought about it. About the gala in November, and the mirror, and the 3 seconds that had changed the angle of everything. About the Tuesday with the chicken broth. About the Christmas morning bagels. About the spring evenings with Harriet growing faster than Greg, and the marine provisions and the Thursday appointments and the texts that were not logistical. About the accumulation of 11 ordinary years and what they'd turned out to contain. "Yeah, Bug," he said. "I am." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to the symbiosis illustration. He watched her work. Outside, the spring light was coming through the window at the angle it came through in March, warm and specific and arriving a little earlier each day, which was the thing about seasons. They changed without your noticing, 1 degree at a time, until one afternoon you look up and it's different, completely different, and you try to find the moment it shifted and you can't, because it didn't shift in a moment. It shifted in the accumulation of 1,000 unremarkable days. That was how it worked. That was how all of it worked. The light, the seasons, the love that built itself quietly from materials nobody cataloged because they seemed ordinary at the time. Greg shared the window with Harriet. The horse parliament had marine provisions. Mia's poster board was almost done. And Liam Carter, 32 years old, single father, structural engineer, the man nobody had thought to look for in the ballroom because he'd always been at the edge of things, sat at the kitchen table on a March evening and felt, for the first time in as long as he could accurately account for, entirely present in his own life. All the way present. Not managing it from the outside. In it.